Good afternoon. This is the March 3rd, 2026 regular meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Friedman?
Here.
Councilmember Santamaria, not yet present. Councilmember Gutierrez, not yet present. Mayor Ross?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon?
Here.
Councilmember Harmon?
Here.
And Councilmember Jordan?
Here.
All right, very good. And with that, you have a ceremony item to read.
I do, and that's item 1, Employee Recognition Service Award pins.
Madam Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It is my privilege to recognize a number of city employees today who are celebrating work anniversaries with the city of Santa Barbara. I'm going to start. I don't believe we have any here with us in the council chambers today, so I'll read all of them, and then we'll just applaud all at the end. So 5 years of service, we have Anthony Contreras, our Senior Electronics Communications Technician in IT, Jairo Fernandez, a police officer, Justin Chow, Library Technician, Christian Hoffland, Administrative Analyst 2 in Sustainability and Resilience Department. Celebrating 10 years of service, we have Megan Arcienega, Senior Planner 2 in Community Development, John Frolicker, Identification Technician in the Police Department, Christopher Mendoza, Lead Equipment Technician in the Public Works Department. Celebrating 20 years of service, Michelle Sanchez, Accounting Assistant in Finance, Nicole Casper, Administrative Assistant in the Police Department, and Michael Clunan, Supervising Engineer in the Public Works Department. And last but certainly not least, with 25 years of service, Trevor Jones, who is a fire engineer with our fire department, Brad Waters, a fire captain, and Rob Jensen, a fire engineer. And I want to say thanks to all of them for their many years of hard work and service.
All right, thank you, Madam Administrator. Are there any changes to the agenda?
I don't have any from staff. I'm not aware of any other changes, Mayor.
Okay, very good. And with that, we'll go to the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, you have some items to read.
I do. Item 3, Affordability Covenant Amendment for Village Apartments property located at 518 through 524 West Canon Perdido Street. Ordinance adoption. Recommendation the council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the city administrator to execute the second amendment affordability control covenant imposed on real property with Turner Lighthouse LP for property located at 518 through 524 West Canon Perdido Street. Item 4, power purchase and battery energy storage service agreement with Staten Solar Corporation at the new police station. Ordinance introduction agreement. Recommendation that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing sustainability and resilience director to execute a power purchase and battery storage services agreement with Staten Solar Corporation to develop, own, operate, and maintain a solar photovoltaic generation and battery energy storage system at the City of Santa Barbara Police Station located at 601 Santa Barbara Street and sell all power generated and battery energy storage services to the city. And that is all the consent items to read, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good. Is there any item that anyone on council needs to pull for further discussion or separate vote? And is there anyone online who needs to pull an item?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to check with Rachel Brescian to see which item she wishes to speak on. Rachel Brescian, what item would you like to speak on?
Hi, I wanted to speak on the fair housing with the tenants union. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
I believe that'll be general public
It's a
comment.
general public
So
comment.
General
It's
public,
not
thank
on the
you.
agenda, so you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Rachel Bricken, and I am a 57-year-old single person that lived on the Mesa for 3 years. And I wanted to talk about just the lack of support that I got from the rental mediation task force. I was a tenant with a documented disability, and for 3 years, I lived on the Mesa with a landlord named Michael Gilson, who has over 36 properties here in Santa Barbara and Isla Vista. And he lived on the same property as me. The dwelling contained black mold. I had harassment, including written communications, literally telling me to kill myself, written threats of physical harm. I had degrading and humiliating name calling in writing, sexual comments, coercive behavior, ongoing intimidation, entry without proper notice, even going through my garbage, and retaliatory rent increases. And on March 30th of last year, the landlord appeared fully nude outside of my front door on my Ring camera. This occurred in the context of an ongoing sexualized harassment, creating an environment of fear, humiliation, and really a loss of safety. I added a roommate with prior written approval, and the landlord imposed a $500 monthly rent increase. And eventually, after 3 years, I was paying $5,100 for a 2-bedroom apartment on the Mesa. So I sought help before eviction occurred because I was trying to remain safely housed. The rental mediation board told me that they only handle formal evictions. Legal aid told me the same. And they also told me just to call the building inspector. So the message was clear. If I stopped paying my rent and got myself evicted, I could get some help. So the building inspector came by. He did say that the dwelling was an illegal, unpermitted unit. And the landlord was given 45 days to submit architectural drawings, and then the violations were later deemed corrected. So there was no tenant restitution, no forced action that protected me, and I guess I'd been paying rent on an unlawful dwelling. So I paid, my security deposit was retained, and I reported the illegal conditions at personal risk of retaliation and real fear. So nothing was done, and then I ended up doing, I guess what's called a constructive eviction. So I fled for my own safety, and I was unable to obtain any kind of real estate attorney representation because he had what appeared to be retained everybody in Santa Barbara County. So I wasn't able to get counsel. So my real comment today is that tenants facing long-established landlords in Santa Barbara really have difficulty obtaining representation. There was no agency willing to intervene before I was displaced. And again, I wasn't formally evicted. I fled. So now I live in Tucson, and after being in Santa Barbara for more than 3 decades and being a homeowner. So just in conclusion, when I needed protection as a tenant, there was no agency with authority to act unless I allowed myself to be evicted. Thanks for letting me speak.
All right, thank you. With that, we're going to return back to the consent calendar for a motion and to approve the consent calendar. Do I have anyone?
Move consent.
Moved by Harmon. Second by Sneddon. May we have the vote, please?
This is a motion by Councilmember Harmon, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon for the entirety of the consent calendar. Please go ahead and vote.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much. And with that, we will return to general public comment. First speaker is Jeffrey Schuman. 3 minutes at the dais for anything that is within our purview but not on today's agenda.
Hi.
Go right ahead.
My name is Jeffrey Schuman. I live on Laguna Street, and I want to tell you guys how unfair this rent stabilization program that you put in. Because every one of these big property management companies have figured out a way to get around it. And I was planning on my rent being reduced on March 1st, and because of the loopholes you put in this, they were able to raise my rent. And today I had to cancel my health insurance and go to a different health insurance because I couldn't afford health insurance and pay my rent. I get $2,400 a month in Social Security. My rent's $2,750 for 2 rooms. And it's outrageous. And I was so happy that you guys did this, and then I found out that the law is not enforceable. The owner of Sandpiper wrote me an email I'd be glad to share with you, basically laughing and saying, oh, it's not my problem they wrote such a lousy ordinance. You guys should be ashamed of yourself. Instead of helping people, you hurt people. 60% of the people that live in Santa Barbara are renters. And the reason State Street is empty is because you're becoming a society with just rich people and getting rid of all the poor and diversity, and you need a symbiotic relationship between everybody to make a healthy community. Look what's happening at SLO. Do you guys read the reports that come up why their downtown is failing? I mean, there's so much proof is that you need a vibrant, diversified community, and still you guys ignore it. And I want to also back up. I tried to obtain a lawyer on another issue against Sandpiper. There are no lawyers that will represent tenants in Santa Barbara, except for one. And the price is so ridiculous, nobody in their right mind could afford it. This is a travesty. And I went to mediation, and nothing got done with my problem. And I talked to them yesterday because of my rent increase. And she said, well, let me look at the pictures. She looked at the pictures. She goes, oh, my gosh, how did this happen to you? And I said, I don't know. I kept writing you guys. I kept bringing you proof. I sent you pictures. I did everything. They said, oh, well, it just fell between the cracks. And they go, we represent 3 cities or 3 counties. I don't know how many. We get so many phone calls, we just can't help everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Dana Hoffenberg?
I'm sorry? Oh, that makes
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Dana Hoffenberg. I'm a member of SEIU Local 620, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the General Unit. The last time I stood before you in this capacity was almost exactly a year ago to comment on key considerations for the class and compensation study, most notably the importance of prioritizing cost of living, not just cost of labor, in determining fair and competitive compensation. We are actively working with Human Resources and have recently received the first job family for review. We are encouraged to see progress on this long-awaited and critically important study. However, as we review this iteration, it has become clear that the key component of cost of living has not been adequately addressed. As several labor partners made clear last year, and I believe the council conveyed they agreed, the high cost of living in the city must be a central consideration in this study. Unfortunately, the cost of living index currently being used in the salary survey relies on regional cost of living data, which masses the city together with all other parts of Santa Barbara County. The result is that the study claims that the cost of living in Santa Barbara is the same as the cost of living in Santa Maria. It also claims that we have the same cost of living as Ventura and Oxnard. We all know that this does not reflect reality. My coworkers would not be moving farther and farther away and having to face costlier, more time-sucking commutes or leaving their positions altogether to move to different areas if there was no cost of living difference between the city and these other communities. We live and work in a unique region with dramatic cost of living swings within our county, which means a broader regional index is not appropriate in this case. These cost of living differences materially affect our workforce, and they are not being meaningfully captured in the study as it is currently proposed. To be clear, SEIU does not accept these assumptions in the study as it is currently written. We will continue to advocate strongly to ensure that the cost of living is accurately and adequately accounted for moving forward. The current methodology does not meet our standards, and I hope it doesn't meet yours either. We look forward to continuing our work with HR to complete and implement this study, but I urge you to remember none of the work of the city's programs, initiatives, or priorities can move forward without the staff who do the work every day. Bringing this study across the finish line must remain a priority, with implementation backed by the necessary budget and resources. Its outcome should be accurate and equitable, one that meaningfully recognizes the cost of living pressures in the city and reflects the value our employees bring to both the organization and the community as a whole. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Amanda Green? We're not doing clapping and stuff, so if you don't mind.
Hello, I'm Amanda. I'm a resident of Santa Barbara. I spoke here a few weeks ago about the increasing urgency of local investment in climate change resilience. So a little bit of repetition. And just because we've surpassed the 1.5 degree threshold, the urgency of investing in resilience to protect from supply chain disruptions in energy, water, internet, and food is the chances of that are becoming greater and greater. The Department of Energy has even released memos on this. Meanwhile, federal funding for local infrastructure, social services, and public health is being cut at historic rates. So the question is, what is the city's plan for climate resilience as federal funding disappears? Projects like urban gardens, local backup generation not only prepare for this risk and bring economics into the city, but it builds priceless community social bonds. A couple ideas have come to mind. One is that, you probably know better than me, every dollar kept in a local credit union or local bank circulates more in the city than holding it in a giant bank where it circulates once and leaves. So moving city investments into local institutions is actually one way to keep money in the city. Another suggestion, I don't know how feasible this is, but to pass vacancy ordinances on State Street so that if a property owner leaves a storefront empty past a certain period, it converts to public or cooperative use. This is not just like a nice-to-have thing. It's really about keeping money local, which is starting to become less optional as federal funding disappears. So there's a related, I have enough time. Okay, there's a related, it seems separate, but it's actually related around AI and data centers. So as the federal government moves money out of environment and health, it's moving it towards AI and surveillance. Regardless of what you think about AI philosophically, it is a huge environmental threat because the data centers use a lot of energy and water. So it's kind of like a double whammy. But the good news is that cities have real power in this domain. They can pass digital privacy ordinances. So Boston and Portland have banned things like facial recognition. San Francisco and New York, they don't share resident data with agencies without a court order. And Santa Barbara can do the same. It also has the opportunity to have influence by who they hire as tech vendors and avoiding the worst offenders, which are becoming increasingly likely to be Google and Amazon and Oracle, some of the big ones we've used to trust. And all right, thank you so much.
Paul Ricciazzi.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Paul Ricciazzi, and I live in the San Roque District. I am here to advocate for the conversion of the 108-acre Santa Barbara Municipal Golf Course on Las Positas. Santa Barbara is facing a severe housing affordability crisis, coupled with an urgent need for climate adaptation and open space preservation. Continuing to use over 100 acres of prime city land primarily for an exclusive water-intensive recreational activity is no longer sustainable. I urge the City Council to take the steps required to convert this site into a high-value asset for our community. I would like our city to pursue two key objectives. One, develop 50% of the land into high-density, affordable housing. This will help us meet our regional housing needs allocation mandates, providing homes for our teachers, nurses, service workers without creating urban sprawl. And two, convert the other 50% of the land area into a dedicated public native species wilderness park. Imagine a central park for Santa Barbara, a restored land free of pesticides and gas-powered lawnmowers, an area that sequesters carbon, creates habitat for native species, and offers walking trails for the public. With the municipal golf course frequently facing financial deficits, this is the time to apply best use analysis to this valuable resource. We can simultaneously tackle our housing crisis and invest in sustainable, resilient green space that benefits wildlife and a larger fraction of city residents, not just golfers. The state legislature has introduced several bills seeking to rezone publicly owned golf courses for open space and affordable housing. Though these initiatives have failed to advance, there is no reason for our city to wait for the state to get its act together. We know it's the right thing to do. I ask that this council take proactive leadership to transform this underutilized land into a sustainable community gem. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, no applause, all right? Rick Morse.
There you go. Mayor and members of the City Council, my name is Rick Morse, and I'm an American Bar Association accredited paralegal, and I've been one for about 35 years. I've worked for landlord-tenant attorneys for both landlords and tenants, and I've never seen anything like Santa Barbara. I moved here 8 years ago, and the last thing I wanted to do when I moved here was get involved with politics. Last November, I got kind of sucked into the mediation protocol with the city of Santa Barbara, and it was something I was completely unfamiliar with. I'd never experienced that type of thing before. There were a couple of things that really stood out. First of all, it was a city of Santa Barbara ordinance, and I live in Carpinteria. I didn't think it applied to me. The other one was whenever you get the notice, it's a pretty official notice, and I kind of felt like the city was joining with my landlord to gang up on me when I first received it. It says it's voluntary, but I didn't feel like it was voluntary, even though I didn't think it applied to me, because I don't live in the city of Santa Barbara. It says it's impartial, and initially it appeared to be impartial, but I got a call 3 days before Christmas that proved to me otherwise. They tell you that they can't give you legal advice, but I felt that the mediator was advising me to take the landlord's offer because 3 days before Christmas, when he called me, he told me that I could find myself evicted after the first of the year. And I'm sure that he was pretty careful with the words that he used, but it was pretty intimidating, and I felt like I was being bullied. So after the first of the year, he contacted me again, and I told him that we were unsuccessful at coming to an amicable resolution and that there would be no new agreement through the mediation protocol. I could feel the trepidation in his voice when he said, oh. I felt like he had this overwhelming need, because it's his job, to work out some sort of an agreement. Like he felt like he was failing if I didn't agree to something. So I'm here today. I was here on the 16th of December. It was my first appearance, and 13th of January. I'm here today to ask you guys, how do I get on the focus group for the mediation? If anybody from the city could point me in the right
We actually aren't
direction.
having a conversation. This is your chance to speak, so.
Well, no, I know. I mean, if somebody
We're
can
not-
point
so
me
you-
in the right direction, it'd be cool after the meeting or whatever. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
See Attorney Land.
Faith Ellington Baker? Baker.
Hi, I'm Faith Ellington Baker. I'm here today to talk about multiple firsthand reports of illegal attempted and signed rent increases that are clear violations of the recently passed rent increase moratorium ordinance. So as it stands now, the recourse they have to deal with these sort of violations is to take it to the Rental Housing Mediation Board, who then passes it along to the city attorney at their discretion. This process is dangerously delayed. It allows property managers to continue to break the law, and it means that tenants aren't getting timely responses if they're getting a response at all. As is mentioned, the Rental Housing Mediation Board doesn't even have the authority to give legal advice, so any sort of violation in this capacity should come directly to the city attorney. It's obviously a legal issue. Honestly, any sort of renter legal thing should come directly to the city attorney. It's a legal issue. If they can't give legal advice and it's spending all this time in flux, then it means that it's a war of attrition, and tenants are going to lose. They don't have the resources to pay for that time or those lawyers that property management companies do. What we really need is a rent board, but in the immediate, I think that we need time-bound referrals from the Rental Housing Mediation Board. We need direct intake and acknowledgement from the city attorney about any sort of rent freeze complaint. We need prompt status reports to tenants so they know what's going on and clear communication about their complaint. And then I would really also like public enforcement reporting about these violations, because it needs to be seen as the civil and criminal breaches that they are. Like this rent ordinance is now law, and so it needs to be enforced as such. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Sophia Lake?
Hello. I'm actually reading a comment on behalf of another tenant in the city of Santa Barbara who just couldn't be here today because she's working. So this is from Natasha Durrell. In 2022, after COVID protections lifted, I was pushed out of my Santa Barbara rental after more than 6 months of uninhabitable conditions, harassment, and a forced entry into my unit while I was inside telling my landlord not to enter. I have video of that morning. For months, I lived with plywood installed as my bathroom door. Basic repairs were ignored. I documented everything. Then I was served a pay or quit notice, raising my rent from $1,850 to $4,700, nearly triple, effectively pricing me out. I later learned the unit was not legally permitted. During mediation, I was told this was one of the most bizarre cases they had seen. Public records showed prior lawsuits involving this landlord and former tenants, including allegations of physical violence. Still, no meaningful enforcement followed. He continues to rent in Santa Barbara County today. This is what happens when mediation fails. When a landlord can repeatedly generate complaints, face allegations of violence, ignore habitability, attempt extreme rent hikes, and still operate without consequence, the mediation system is not protecting tenants, but really, who is it protecting? Displacement should not be this easy. If Santa Barbara County is serious about housing stability, it needs mediation that acts on these matters. Simple as that. And yeah, this is just a story of someone's housing mediation experience, which is why we need all the protections that Faith just went over. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Lorkins?
Good afternoon, Council. I am here today reading a story from a local tenant who wished to remain anonymous for fear of whatever could come of speaking out. Dear City Council, my first interaction with the Rental Housing Mediation Board was in May 2025. Initially, I had to follow up multiple times via phone and email before receiving a response. This led to a series of email exchanges with a staff member who provided general information, which was sufficient at the time, as I was proactively researching my rights as a tenant. However, several months later, when, over the course of 4 months, my landlord pressured me to sign a document that would relinquish my legal rights, tenant rights, despite my continued polite refusals, I reached out to the same Rental Housing Mediation Board staff member for assistance. Despite following up via email, phone, and multiple messages, I received no response. I then sought advice from the free legal assistance at the courthouse, but the lawyer I met with was dismissive, rushed, and provided little guidance. She ultimately referred me back to the Rental Housing Mediation Board, which still did not respond. I exhausted all resources the city offers, which are funded by Santa Barbara residents, 59% of whom are renters, but was unable to obtain adequate information and support regarding my legal rights and the steps to take when these rights were being violated. This raises concerns about the effectiveness of the Rental Housing Mediation Board. A rent board that responds to tenants and enforces existing laws would be far better use of city resources. As you've even heard just today, there are already stories of tenants receiving unlawful rent increases under the current rent freeze, and this story highlights the unbalanced legal structure of Santa Barbara. In the best case scenario, tenants are offered the most basic of legal services, but we're hearing consistent stories of people basically being stonewalled after being told the Rental Housing Mediation Board can't give legal advice. The story I just read you and the others that my fellow tenants have told today serve to highlight not only the immediate need for greater transparency and communication between the Rental Housing Mediation Board and tenants, but also the need for a strong rent board that can effectively handle complaints and relieve the legal burden from the city attorney's office. Landlords are blatantly trying to circumvent the rent freeze, and tenants are being left to their own devices. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Speakers online?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one raised hand. Chelsea Lancaster, please go ahead. Chelsea Lancaster, go ahead.
Hello, council, city staff. I'm calling today to create a sense of urgency around the flock cameras in the city of Santa Barbara. As you may have heard, the Oxnard Police Department recently found out in an audit that OPD's flock safety security settings had been set to California only access, but the vendor enabled nationwide query, which allowed agencies from outside of California, which also include federal agencies, to query OPD's data without OPD's knowledge or approval. This is not the first time this has happened. We have known that there is a sharing of valuable information. This is what the surveillance state looks like. And in the context of what we are dealing with ICE and the increased violence being perpetrated on our most vulnerable community members, and the people that are out to protect them, I think this is an urgent issue that I would really like to see on the next agenda, and I would like this to be moved to action immediately. I would also just like to note that we're still awaiting some meaningful leadership and action when it comes to the assault on our most vulnerable community members, on our immigrant community and our communities of color. I see a lot of performative things happening. I see a lot of rhetoric. I see that some council members who have frankly not shown up in any meaningful way went to the talk last night that happened at the beer garden. I would love to know if you were moved to some kind of action based on what you bared witness to yesterday evening. I would also love to name the ongoing feelings of collusion between law enforcement agencies, in particular the Santa Barbara Police Department. What we witnessed on February 20th was completely unacceptable in terms of the Santa Barbara Police Department allowing ICE to pull their vehicle into the Santa Barbara Police Department. Again, we fund Santa Barbara Police Department salaries. Santa Barbara Police Department should function to keep community members safe, and we have not felt any kind of alignment in that regard. I will also be submitting a public records request because we heard that one of the community members who was bearing witness to the violence that was inflicted on the young man in front of the probation office on Carrillo, and then Doug Hayes afterwards, that somebody called the Santa Barbara Police Department and reported that they were afraid that ICE was going to kill that young man, and Santa Barbara Police Department still chose to not show up and protect our community in any kind of meaningful way. So again, we expect real leadership from you all. This is just going to get worse. It's been 14 months and we're seeing an escalation of violence, and DHS and ICE has promised that they are going to increase their assault on the state of California, which includes Santa Barbara. We are on the front lines of this crisis, risking our lives every day, and we're not feeling any kind of meaningful solidarity or protection. So again, I would love to know, what are you going to do in the context of this humanitarian crisis?
That's your
that we
time.
are
Thanks very
experiencing?
much.
Thank you.
All right, any further speakers online?
No further raised
Okay,
hands, Mr. Mayor.
With that, we will close general public comment and move on to the next item. Item
Mayor-
7, would you read that, please?
Mayor Rouse, if
Yeah.
you wouldn't mind, just because I know there's a lot of questions and concerns about both the rent freeze moratorium and the sort of access to legal counsel, I just if I could just take a moment to clarify, I just think it's important, and given how many people have expressed concerns. Neither city staff nor the city attorney's office can provide legal advice on personal matters related to rent. What we can do is enforce the ordinance. What our rental housing mediation staff will do is they are the intake. They take the complaints, and then we are working on a protocol with the city attorney's office where their investigative staff will be looking into these issues on a complaint-by-complaint basis. Obviously, this is new for us as well. We don't have an online tracking system. All of those are part of the conversation about a larger program development, so I just want to make sure that that's clear. If there is a complaint or a concern about enforcement of the rent freeze moratorium, people can call 805-564-5420, and that is where those staff are, again, not able to provide legal advice, but will take complaints and concerns, and we'll process those as quickly as we can, given the resources that we have. If people are interested in participating in the policy discussion around rent stabilization, Barbara Anderson in the city administrator's office is leading that effort. We do have on the city's website, if you just put rent stabilization as the search term, form in the homepage. You can get all of information. Her information is there, her email address and phone number. So I appreciate everyone's patience. This is new for us as well. We're trying to put together systems, but again, please report those to us so that we can investigate.
All right, thank you. And with that, Madam Clerk, would you read item 7 into the record, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 7, revenue tax measure poll results, discussion and direction.
All right, Mr. DiMartini.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rouse, members of the City Council. My name is Keith DiMartini, and I'm the city's finance director. It's my pleasure to present an overview of our revenue tax measure poll results and information about a possible revenue measure. The request to you today is to receive a report from staff regarding the poll and then provide direction to staff regarding a potential revenue measure that could be placed on the ballot in November of 2026. The agenda for today's presentation is listed here on this slide. We'll first talk about some of the recent budget balancing options that staff has been working on and been talking with the Finance Committee and City Council. I'll turn it over to Mr. Adam Sonnenschein from FM3. He is a consultant at the polling firm that we reached out to, and their firm conducted the poll. He'll present the poll results. I'll take it back and talk about the real property transfer tax. That is one of the tax measures being proposed. We'll also talk about the direction that the Finance Committee gave staff a couple of weeks ago, and then request City Council to give us direction. So with that, let's jump into some of the budget balancing options and the process that we've been embarking on over the last couple of months. Staff, knowing that we have some budget challenges ahead of us, have been working very hard to come up with a series of budget balancing options, which include reducing and controlling expenditures, as well as identifying potential additional revenue sources to help us fund our operations. We categorize them into these 3 tiers, the first one being ones that we can implement fairly quickly, and then others that might take a little bit more time. And the idea of a potential revenue measure on an upcoming election is one that actually fell into tier 2. It takes more time. It's more extensive, a robust community outreach process, but it's one that we recommended and feel strongly is one that could be an option for consideration at this time. And so when we posed those options to the Finance Committee and City Council, you communicated to staff that initiating a poll to assess the viability of a potential revenue measure was one that was of utmost priority to you. So we went ahead and began that process. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Adam Sonnenschein, who's going to give an overview of the recent poll that was conducted.
And before he starts, just one quick announcement that we're getting a lot of speaker slips, so I'm going to cut off accepting new speaker slips or raised hands online at 10 minutes to 3. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam Sonnenschein from FM3. Happy to be back and sharing results of a new survey with you. We did this survey back in December, from the 4th to the 11th, with voters likely to participate in the November 2026 election based on their past voting history, meaning they're both registered to vote and they vote more frequently than just showing up once every 4 years to vote in the presidential election. We would expect, based on that past history, they'd be showing up in this election as well. Did 520 survey interviews, which means we've got a margin of error for questions asked of everybody of plus or minus 4.4%. We do have questions where we took half of the sample and asked it one way and the other half asked it a different way. In those cases, the margin of error is a little bit larger. It's plus or minus, let's call it 6%. We reach people a few different ways, as we have in the past for the city. We did phone calls with live telephone interviewers on cell phones and landlines, as well as sending emails and text messages for people to take the survey online. The online survey is not like one of the ones that shows up on Facebook or Nextdoor, and you could take it 50 times and send it to all your friends to do it. It's protected, so each respondent who gets that can only do it once. That helps protect the randomness of the sample. We've got some prior examples of work we've done for this city in 2017, 2023, and 2024. We offered this survey in English and Spanish, and you might see something that doesn't quite add up to 100% because we've rounded decimal points as we go. We could go to the next slide, please, and then skip ahead. As we look at some of the key perspectives on the potential for a revenue measure, one of those is the perception of need for additional funding. And we find that a majority of voters in the city continue to perceive that there's a need for additional funding. We're getting 56% who say either a great or some need, 33% who say a little or no real need, another 11% there in the gold is don't know. And the number who say great or some need is pretty consistent to where we were before the election in 2024 when we did that survey in May, although you'll notice there is a little bit higher in that, I guess on your screen, it's kind of a grayish 24% for no real need. That number has bumped up a little bit as maybe times have changed a bit. And we've got a different group of voters. The 2024 survey was with presidential voters. Here we have midterm election voters. You go to the next slide. We wanted to get a sense of what some of the concerns are that voters have in the community. So this question is going to be on a couple different slides. You can actually see the question if your eyesight's good enough down at the bottom. We've got the actual wording of the question that some issues that people in Santa Barbara may be concerned about. Are these extremely serious, very serious, somewhat serious, not too serious, not a problem at all for people who live in the city? And we put together the extremely serious and very serious on the right-hand side. At the top of the list, the ones that are the most serious problems in the minds of voters are the cost of housing, cost of living, lack of affordable housing, as well as the number of vacant storefronts in downtown, although you'll notice the first two are much higher in terms of the extremely serious problem. That first bar there was 66% for cost of housing, 54% for cost of living. We've got a kind of next tier after number of vacant storefronts, including the number of homeless people, wildfires and other natural disasters, homes converted to short-term rentals, and then a lack of good paying jobs. If we go to the next slide and continue this question, there are a number of items here, but I think one of the ones that we thought is important to highlight as it relates to a revenue measure is the fact that the amount you pay in local taxes and fees is not a top concern at this point. 37% would say it's either an extremely or very serious problem. You've got a healthy percentage who say it's not really a problem at all. And so that's definitely lower in people's minds. And if we go to the next slide, one of the revenue measures we were considering was related to transient occupancy tax, a hotel tax. You can see here relatively low concerns about either the impacts of tourism on residents' quality of life or the condition of the local tourism economy, and on both sides of that scale. And we also were interested in understanding attitudes on a parcel tax for library funding. We can see the condition of local public libraries is the lowest rated concern. Only 7% would consider that to be an extremely or very serious problem. We can go to the next slide and then carry on from there. We wanted to get an understanding of how serious how important various potential uses of funding from these measures could be. And since we were testing a couple different measures, we just said the question about services provided by the city and aspects of city budgeting. And for each one, indicate whether it's extremely important to you or very important to you. Those are the red and blue bars here. Somewhat is, I guess, in the white. Then you've got not too important in gray and a goldish color for don't know. A few things that we find here notable in terms of the top priorities. Some of these are not related to housing, although the goal of the measures that we tested was either libraries or more directly in terms of housing funding. But we do see things like fire and paramedic response, retaining and attracting local businesses, keeping public areas safe and clean, maintaining 911 emergency response, keeping fire stations open and staffed. Several of these are related to public safety in a variety of different ways, along with that item about retaining and attracting businesses, protecting drinking water sources, broadly speaking, maintaining essential services. And then that last item, which got a little bit cut off on the slide, is improving housing affordability for Santa Barbara's workforce. And in terms of the ways we described uses of funding related to housing, that was the most important of the ones that we tested. If we go to the next slide and kind of keep within the same question, some of the other items here that are showing up are some of the broader statements, like helping to maintain quality of life for residents, maintaining the city's long-term financial stability. We see some more kind of public safety items here, such as maintaining police response, We also, as well as updating emergency communication systems and wildfire, natural disaster preparedness. But then down near the bottom of this slide, you can see more than 7 in 10 saying either addressing homelessness or preventing homelessness is either extremely or very important to them. We were testing the variations in language to see if one mattered more than the other, and it really didn't in both cases. Statistically about the same in that low 70% range. If you go to the next slide, here we're seeing some additional housing priorities. That first item, which again got a little cut off on the translation of the slide here, says improving housing affordability for working class and low income families and individuals. That's at 70%. You can see parks, youth services. These aren't all pretty good priorities in the sense that you've got close to 70% who would say they're extremely or very important, but you'll just keep in mind that first page of items were items in the 80s and up to 91%. So these are clearly notably lower than those top priorities. We go one more. This is just to look at all of the housing priorities that we tested in the survey to give you a sense of how those rate relative to each other. Again, that first item about housing affordability for Santa Barbara's workforce is the top, with 55% calling that extremely important, another 24% very important. A similar item fourth from the top, improving housing affordability for working class and low-income families and individuals, doesn't quite score as well at 70%. We've got those items related to homelessness, and that's 74, 73%. A little bit further down, though, when we talk about emergency shelter, supportive housing, and notably lower when we reference transitional housing. So from there, we could go ahead 2 slides to look at the 2 different versions of hypothetical housing funding ballot questions that were tested in the survey. We decided to do this in a way where voters were asked about one or the other. And so they weren't thinking about a kind of negotiation between these 2 variations of housing funding measures. These are both drafted to be special purpose measures that require a 2/3 level of support in order to be passed by voters. And they're pretty consistent in terms of the examples of how funding could be used. So in both cases, we're talking about improving housing affordability for Santa Barbara's workforce, working class and low-income families and individuals and others, addressing, reducing, preventing homelessness, including providing emergency services and shelter, supportive housing, qualifying for state and federal matching grants. On the left, you can see the transient occupancy tax, which was a rate increase from 12% to 14%, which would be $5.8 million. On the right-hand side, a property transfer tax measure of $9.50 per $1,000 on real property sales and transfers over $3 million only. That produced a little bit less revenue, $5.1 million. And again, voters were asked to consider one or the other, not both, so that we didn't have that factor of, oh, well, I like this one, but I like that one a little bit more. Let's go ahead and look at the initial reactions to these. So I mentioned that both of these measures would require a 2/3 vote in order to be successful. On the initial vote, neither is at that level. The TOT measure gets 57% to 31%, with about 12% who are undecided. The transfer tax has a larger undecided number at 26%, but also a lower yes total at only 42% compared to 33% who said that they would vote no on that. And you'll see that definitely yes and definitely no are nearly equal on that property transfer tax. One thing, just to preview the results as we provided people with more information, the differences between these 2 measures kind of balanced out. We could go ahead to the next slide. As I was saying, we provided people with information, so we didn't just give them one opportunity to think about this ballot question, but as we've done in your prior surveys as well, we simulated information that the city could provide about why you would be pursuing the measure, what the outcomes would be, what it would mean if this measure were in place. And several of the statements about a housing measure are impactful, with close to 2/3 of voters. The first statement here about the reference to workforce housing and the nurses, firefighters, teachers, other essential workers can afford to live in the city where they work. You've got 70% who say that made them more inclined to favor either of these measures. One about the impact of of housing costs on children and families, not far behind that, and even a little bit higher in the much more inclined, the blue bar there. Matching funds, which in and of itself didn't really impact people's thinking when we saw it in that longer laundry list, but here, a little bit of a story about what that match could mean. We do see 2/3 of respondents saying that statement makes them more inclined, and then referencing some of the situation with homelessness in the city, and that the measure could help address these issues, including connecting people with services and making sure that the city's business districts, parks, and other public areas are safe and clean. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the kind of next tier of messages here, of statements that didn't quite reach that 2/3 level in terms of people's response to them. That is one that's specific to the TOT, saying that it would be paid by out-of-town visitors and tourists when they stay at a hotel and not residents. A fiscal accountability, which we know is always part of the mix for people, right? Regardless of their community, there's always concern that funding from a ballot measure doesn't go where people expect it to go. And so the fact that there's requirements to keep the funding, both local and for the uses that are described, are important to people. And then discussing the cost of rent and the amount that people are spending on rent and helping Santa Barbara be more affordable. He has a pretty strong, much more inclined at 38%, but overall is at 60%. If we go one more slide ahead, we've got some of the statements that were on the lower end of their impact to the respondents. One being that the lack of housing is one of the biggest challenges we face, which people tended to agree with, you'll recall in one of the earlier slides. And this will make the city do more to make housing affordable. It's okay as a statement, but doesn't resonate as strongly as some of the others. The number of people on waiting lists for affordable housing. For the transfer tax, mentioning that it is designed to be fair and have no impact on the cost of living for residents, only applies when a home is sold. You see that one doesn't resonate as strongly, only 55% with 21% much more inclined. And lastly, framing this as an ability to prevent cuts and reflect the state of the economy and federal and state government potential cuts to city services. So if you go ahead to the next slide, we'll show you the impact of those statements. On the left-hand side for the TOT measure, there's not a major change there. It was 57 to 31 initially, now 59 to 28. On the right-hand side, looking at the property transfer tax, that did have a pretty substantial growth from 42% yes up to 61% yes. It's still short of a 2/3 threshold, but that one is now statistically equal with that TOT measure. And we wanted to be sure to provide opinions from both sides. We don't want to be biased and only project sort of the positive aspects of this. So we did provide a statement that could come from potential opponents talking about cost of living and all of the concerns that voters may have about any revenue measure that's on the ballot, and then re-ask the ballot question a third time. If you go to the next slide, you'll see for the TOT, it remains right in that upper 50s level, 57 to 30 after opposition. So those three sort of dots on the line there are the initial vote when people just respond to the ballot question the first time. The second dot is their vote after hearing some of those informational statements that we just went through. And then the last one is after the opposition statement, which I just described. The TOT seems pretty stable in all 3 points in the survey, never at 2/3, but always well above 50%. The property transfer tax has much more of a bounce, starts at that lower 42%, rises up to 61%, but then falls down to 50%. And again, in this context, in the measure that we described, would need 2/3 to be successful. If we go to the next slide, you'll see just some comparison to the Measure I election results from the surveys that we did for the city in 2023 and 2024 with the same pattern. So the first dots here, the initial vote, the second, the vote after the informational statements from the city's perspective, and the third, after opposition. You can see when we followed up with a tracking survey in May of 2024, simulated some of that outreach. We got to 63% yes. We also simulated some organized opposition to the measure, which didn't really seem to materialize, which would have knocked it down if that had happened, or at least it appeared that it would. In the end, the measure got right at that 63% number. Lastly, if we go ahead both to this slide and the next one and look at the library measure that was tested, we did ask about a $49 per parcel tax with annual adjustments of 3%, which would be $1.3 million. And you can see at the top some of the illustrative examples of how funding could be used from this measure to support the library in terms of both the programming and some of the physical upgrades and repairs that are needed. If you go to the next slide, here's the result on that measure, which also would require 2/3, only getting 41% yes on that initial vote, with slightly more people saying they would definitely vote no than definitely vote yes. We did not follow this up with the pattern of information opposition just because there's a limit to how much we could do in this survey. But that does not appear to be likely to get to the 2/3 threshold based on what we saw earlier, that it's the lowest level of concern for people. And you can see the initial reaction on that measure. So we could go ahead to the conclusions, which are 2 slides ahead. So we see that a majority of voters, but less than 2/3, continue to think that the city needs additional funding. Addressing housing affordability is clearly a major priority for Santa Barbara voters, but a city ballot measure focused exclusively on that and funded by either a TOT or a transfer tax at this point or at the time of the survey did not have sufficient support to reach the 2/3 level required for passage for that measure. Both measures would benefit from a dedicated informational effort, but don't get to that 2/3 level, particularly if we simulate organized opposition to it. And we just mentioned a library parcel tax unlikely to be successful in November. And on the last slide, we did not test a general purpose TOT measure or general purpose transfer tax measure. We do think that the TOT looks like that would have a good chance of being successful based on voters' prioritization of elements of the city's budget related to public safety and retaining local businesses, et cetera. And the fact that a housing-focused TOT measure was already in the high 50s, and to loop in other kinds of services that voters prioritize would probably help. I know that there's some other considerations there beyond just what we see in terms of the survey data, but that's the way that the survey data broke on that question. Leading concerns are the cost of housing, lack of affordable housing, cost of living, number of vacant storefronts downtown, and to a lesser degree, homelessness in the city. Top priorities for funding include a bunch of different things related to public safety, mentioned retaining and attracting local businesses, local drinking water sources, and then also workforce housing affordability. Within the housing realm, other priorities include addressing, preventing, and reducing homelessness, including emergency homeless services and shelter, and improving affordability for working class and low-income families and individuals. So I will stop there. Keith, I think it's going back to you for more information.
Yes, thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it. And so now, just to remind council, this presentation was delivered to the Finance Committee a couple of weeks ago. The Finance Committee communicated to staff that they're more inclined to want to sort of learn more and hear more about the real property transfer tax. Also, given the poll results, that there was a sort of a substantial amount of potentially undecided voters that just don't know too much about how that tax could work. Staff want to provide additional information about the real property transfer tax as well to help the City Council with their direction today. So with that, the city does have a real property transfer tax. It's in Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Section 4.20. The tax rate is 55 cents per $1,000 valuation of the property when it is transacted, when it sells. That money is collected by the county, and then the county remits that to the city. There are economic factors that impact this tax, and they're listed here on this slide. And this is not a completely exhaustive list, but we only get that tax when properties change ownership. And so depending on how many properties are in inventory in the market, interest rate environment obviously impacts the amount of transactions as well, the sale price, and then other economic factors also. This graph here shows you the real property transfer tax revenue that the city has realized over the past 6+ years. So you can see it hovers at around $1 million a year. It's not a large revenue source for the city, and this goes into the general fund. You can see where there was a bump during the post-COVID sort of boom with a lot of properties changing ownership. Sales prices increased pretty substantially over that 2 year period as well. But it has since stabilized since that 2 year sort of post-COVID boom. And also interest rates during the last couple of years have been rather high. So there have been fewer properties changing ownership. This graph here shows you the recent property transactions. And so I was able to obtain a data set from the county assessor's office, which listed every property that's sold since fiscal year 2014. And I've summarized that information here on this graph. And we broke out commercial versus residential versus other types of properties. Prior comments alluded to wanting to explore and understand whether or not that tax should apply for commercial or for different types of residential properties. This graph shows you that the vast majority of transactions are residential. There's just far more residential properties in the city and very few commercial. It's important to note here that anytime you see fiscal year 2026 data, it only represents half a year worth of data, right? We're only halfway through the fiscal year, so I just want to make that noteworthy. This graph here shows you by fiscal year the number of properties that sold within different sales price brackets. So the tax that was polled proposed increasing the tax to $9.50 only for properties that were sold at $3 million or greater. So staff thought it would be important for the city council and the public to see how many properties actually sell from $0 to $1 million, from $1 million to $2 million, and then so on and so forth. And what this graph shows you is that the vast majority of properties sell within sort of below the $2 million range. And there are quite a few that go up to $3 million, but very, very few in each fiscal year that sell greater than $3 million. This information was used as one of the considerations for proposing a tax at only $3 million at more, not wanting to necessarily burden the vast majority of people that are trying to sell or purchase a home in Santa Barbara. So this graph here is sort of a continuation of the last graph that I just showed you, and it shows you the total number of properties that sold within that 11 plus year time frame that sold within those dollar brackets also. And what it shows you is that 89% of all property sales that occurred within that 11-year period were under $3 million. And so the proposed tax that is before you today, given this historical information, would necessarily only impact 11% of the population if the historical run rate were to continue. This graph here shows you the breakout of commercial and residential. So it shows you what the average sale price was by fiscal year for commercial and residential properties. And the main takeaways on this graph are that the residential sale prices have held pretty steady and have increased gradually over that 11 plus year time horizon. However, the commercial properties, because there are far fewer number of transactions for commercial properties, and some of them are very large, some are small, the average sale price, there is a great degree of variability. And so that's just noteworthy because it would be less advantageous from a revenue generation perspective to only focus on the commercial properties because it is so volatile from a revenue generation perspective. So this table here, if you give me a moment to explain, this is a comparison of the current tax that we've received, which is by fiscal year, which is the first column, the current tax at a rate of 55 cents per $1,000 valuation. The next column is a sensitivity analysis, which shows you what the revenue the city would have collected since fiscal year 2014 if the rate was $9.50, but only for properties that were $3 million or greater. That is the tax rate that is being proposed at this time and the tax rate that was polled. And then you can see the difference. And what you can see by kind of looking at the additional potential increase of the revenue, that it ranges anywhere from $2 million and at a peak at $13 million. Now that $13 million is that year that was sort of within that 2 year post-COVID real estate, call it a boom, if you will. But then it kind of leveled back off over the last couple years. So you can see over the most recent 2 completed fiscal years, it was over $6 million. And so this is really the analysis that was used to come up with the range of about between $5 to $6 million annually if the new tax rate at $9.50 for $3 million properties and greater were to be approved by the voters. This was sort of the basis for that. But again, as you can see, there's variability. The real property transfer tax is more volatile than other taxes. It depends on the economy. It depends on how many houses are in the inventory. It depends on interest rates. There are quite a few factors. It's more volatile than property tax itself. So now this is another graph breaking out commercial versus residential. And what it shows you is how much additional tax the city would have collected by fiscal year if the new tax rate were to be, if it was implemented, and how much revenue we would have recognized from both commercial and residential. And so even though the number of commercial properties, the actual number of transactions was so much lower than residential, it's actually close to half of additional revenue. Again, because the value of the commercial properties are so much greater than the residential properties. That's the main takeaway on this pie chart. And you can see over the past couple of years, it has more stabilized to where the vast majority does come from residential. The years where there's greater economic activity, like the post-COVID blip, that's where you see more variability. Okay, so now one of the pieces of feedback that came from the Finance Committee meeting a couple of weeks ago was to see if we can isolate out the impact if we were to exclude multifamily residential properties from the tax implementation. And so the assessor's office database did articulate which types of properties are sort of multifamily, two unit or more in the residential data set. And so what staff was able to do was determine the difference. That difference column on the far right would be the tax, if it was implemented, the new tax rate, for only those multifamily residential units. And so this data set indicates to staff that it's a little less than $1 million annually that would have been generated if the new tax were implemented. So that would be the amount of the amount of tax that would be reduced if we were to exclude these types of units. So the $5 to $6 million range that staff had already indicated, reduce it by $1 million if we were to exclude multi-family residential units. Okay, and then what staff was able to do with this data set was we ran a series of scenarios. And we picked 3 options just by way of reference to show council and the public what the potential additional tax revenue would be if we changed the tax rate and we changed the dollar threshold of the property sale. So this table first starts with the current rate, right? It's 55 cents per thousand. Right now we get about $1 million. If the rate were to be changed to $9.50, but only for $3 million properties and higher, the additional tax revenue would range between $5 to $6 million. The next 3 options show you how the revenue could increase if the rate changed to $40 per 1,000 square foot, but only for properties valued at $5 million or higher. And then if we had an exclusion for multi-family, multi-residential units, it would come down a little bit. And then if we increase the rate to, say, $60 per 1,000 valuation, but only for properties $6 million or higher, you can see the additional revenue from that also. And we have a scenario tool that we developed, and we can calculate different scenarios if the city council has any interest in that, and bring that back to you. But this was a way for us to sort of articulate and come up with, okay, we think that maybe this $9.50 might be sort of an option because it's not such a high rate. And you saw on the prior graphs that if you exclude the properties that are below 5 or 6 million, the total number of transactions that you're actually assessing the revised tax goes down significantly. And so there's a balance there. There need to be enough transactions that will be assessed the additional tax to make it worthwhile. So those are some things that staff balanced. We also thought it would be important for the council and the public to understand what other municipalities throughout California have done to change their real property transfer tax rate over the last couple of years. And you can see a couple examples listed here. There are 5 cities that we were able to summarize. Santa Monica raised their rate to $56 per thousand. Culver City had a percent-based rate change, and they had three tiers, not just the additional one that we're proposing. City of LA, it's commonly referred to as ULA, increased their rate for properties over 5 million to 10 million at 4%, and anything over 10 million at 5.5%. Palo Alto increased it to $3.30 per thousand, and then Mountain View increased it to $3.30, but up to 6 million, and then $15 for everything over 6 million. And so each city has chosen to implement it a little bit differently. So just by way of comparison, what other cities have done. I mentioned the factors that staff evaluated, also with consultation with our consultant, about things that were evaluated to come up with a proposal before you, which is $9.50 for properties over 3 million. Understanding the affordability concerns of housing is something that, I think is important to balance, not increasing the tax on necessarily the majority of transactions, but having it be enough, for a large enough population. Residential versus multifamily versus commercial. We provided some data for you today to help with that conversation. The dollar threshold versus being a percent versus a flat dollar. Those are things that we considered as well. And sort of the final analysis we wanted to provide to you would be, we wanted to explain to council and the public what would be the additional tax for the individual that might be selling their property if it's valued at $3 million or greater. So if you sold your house and it's sold for a sale price of $5 million, under the current tax rate, you would pay $2,750. Under the new tax rate, if it were approved by the voters, it'd be $47,500 for an additional tax amount of $44,750. So in this table, it sort of articulates what the incremental tax increase would be for the different brackets that we analyzed. So staff was recommending increasing the rate to $9.50 for properties over 3 million. It would generate between 5 to 6 million a year. And if the voters approved of it in November of 2026, it would take effect on January 1st of 2027. So our fiscal year 2027 would only realize 50% of an annual revenue increase. So the direction that staff received from the Finance Committee on February 3rd was to go ahead and pursue the real property transfer tax. The Finance Committee expressed that they would like the council to consider potentially using the existing Citizens Oversight Committee that oversees the usage of Measure C, sales tax money, to oversee this measure as well, wanting to reach out to the local realtor community, analyze the impact of different types of properties, and then also consider the council to adopt a resolution prioritizing funding at a later time. And so with that, we wanted to express what the timeline is after today. If council does direct staff to move forward with the potential revenue measure, we would start public outreach, we would start community engagement, and we would produce educational materials to help council and members of the public use over the next number of months to explain what this measure and this effort would be about. Staff would come back to the city council in mid to late June or early July, where council would need to adopt a resolution placing the revenue measure on the ballot. The election would occur on November 3rd, and the new tax rate would take effect on January 1st. So here's our request to the city council, and that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Keith, so on that timeline schedule, there is a absolute date probably where you have to have that to the county or wherever. Is it in July sometime?
Yes, Councilmember Jordan, it is in July. I don't have the exact date,
Okay,
looking at the
so
clerk,
it's
but we
July.
don't necessarily want to wait till that last meeting
Yep.
before, just
Okay.
in case.
Just want to know when to start getting all stressed out. And then if you go back to slide 45. And so, this is like, I get to do this twice today, like figure out 20 different details and hear from 7 people for 100 details, right? But I know we talked about sometime about 3 tiers instead of 2. And so we didn't do any work on a low tier, whether or not that was the same as it is now, and then the 3 million, and then 5 million plus. We didn't do any math on that, right?
I think when the Finance Committee looked at the item, I think the end result of that conversation was that it would be too complicated. So I think the question was do an analysis of with or without commercial properties, see what that looks like. But that is an analysis that we could look at is if the council wanted us to look at multiple tiers. It just gets more complicated from an education perspective, but it's not impossible. And definitely, as you can see here, could be structured in a way to generate more revenue as well.
You still feel that way?
I mean, I think it just makes it more, it's not impossible. Okay. I think we can have that education process. I don't think it's impossible.
Because one of those, vertical bar graphs, while the number of above 5 million transactions looked relatively small on the bar, the impact they carried because of the size of the dollar transaction was significant, a significant amount of revenue, right? I mean, just looking at the way you did it for 2 of them, how we go from 5 million to 17 million, but you skip that middle tier. So I'm reading that right? There's not that many transactions above 5 million, but they bat above their batting average in return.
Yes, I would also just caution that, like, if there was a year where there were no transactions over 5 million, we would have no additional revenue. So I think that is the risk with the real property transfer tax. It is a very volatile revenue source, and I think that's where that middle tier. If you wanted to do a high tier, I think that's great, but you definitely want to have a middle tier that has some increase as well, so that we are hitting that sort of $5 to $6 million every year as a baseline.
That's how my chicken scratches look on paper now, so I agree. So thank you.
Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I will admit to being more supportive of this than I initially was, so education matters, and thank you. From the timeline slide, at what point in that timeline are the priorities delineated? I know we have that option. If you could speak to what that option is, how that works. I know it's a general tax, but at what point in this process would we be setting those priorities?
So I think the conversation would start, we could even start that today if the council had certain priorities that they wanted to focus on for this. My recommendation is that those discussions would continue March through June, and that there would be some sort of sister partner resolution that would be adopted in the June timeframe when the ballot is put on the measure, either included, we would want to have a separate standalone resolution just for the tax measure, and then the council could adopt a second resolution that identified priorities.
Thank you. And that would also be the same meeting when we decided what the oversight might be, or the accountability on that?
I would say the oversight, we'd probably want to have that direction before that official last date, because we'll want to incorporate that in the resolution as well. So we'd want to have that determined well before that last vote date for the council.
Okay, thank you. And then, I don't know if this is a premature question or not, but who runs this campaign?
The city cannot run the campaign legally, so once it is placed on the ballot, it would be, whoever within the community sort of comes together to run campaigns of this sort. So whether it's interest parties, labor groups, other sort of council members acting as their own individuals, those are the people who could run a campaign.
Okay, thank you. And then, any tax or fee is going to have some sort of behavioral response component to it. And the ones I'm interested in is if this would influence flipping You know, does this sort of slow down flipping of houses? Does it do anything in terms of discouraging purchasing of second homes, third homes, that kind of thing? And then, I guess separately, would it discourage selling off of multifamily rental properties so that we might slow that down as well?
I think those, we can look to see if there are any economic studies that have been done. I'm not aware of any sort of behavioral studies that have been done yet on that. Obviously, I think there's some anecdotal evidence that, you know, if you set a price point at $3 million, for example, you may have more homes, if they're right around that $3 million, that they would put them under the $2 million mark or under the $3 million mark. But again, in a competitive and tight housing market where there's multiple offers, you may end up over the $3 million in a sort of bidding process. And knowing Santa Barbara's real estate market, it is fairly competitive. So.
And then is that $3 million, is that, you know, final purchase price, including taxes and every other thing? Or is it the, where is it that you make the mark that that's what the selling price was?
Councilmember Sin, I believe it's the purchase price, but I'm going to have to, 100% confirm that.
Okay. So then that would be negotiated between the buyer and the seller. We don't know which one of those parties might be paying that.
Yes.
Okay. And then that impacts what your loan is to purchase that property as well. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I definitely agree there's a lot of really, really helpful information, though I have to admit I personally am still having serious heartburn. Just a couple questions, and I'm sorry if this is also maybe not an appropriate question, but I was under the impression there's litigation in other communities around the real property transfer tax, and can we get an update about the status of that litigation and how it might impact our decision-making moving forward?
I mean, I think the city attorney can comment on any pending litigation. I would say it's something we're concerned about. There's also a pending statewide initiative that, if it qualifies for the November ballot, could preempt our ability to increase our real property transfer tax. So I think while we would recommend continuing with the outreach and education process, there could be a possibility of having to pivot at the last minute to a TOT increase, unfortunately, if the council wants to continue to proceed with putting a measure on the ballot this fall. So I think it's definitely something we need to monitor and closely be cognizant of. But I'll let the city attorney comment on litigation.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Harmon, actually, Ms. McAdoo said it exactly correct. Like, talks initially, but there's obviously no holding, no decision. That is so early, so it is something we would be monitoring, but there's nothing, no precedent set that would specifically exclude this right now.
Thank you very much. That is very helpful. And it sort of begs the question for me as I look at this timeline, and March through June, we're talking about public outreach, we're talking about community engagement around this. While it seems that there is some chance, we don't know how big that chance is, but it certainly exists, that we may be precluded from doing this. And by that point, we will have missed the window to do community engagement and outreach around the other option that we polled on. It doesn't seem that we're really considering. So I guess I'm wondering if we can, maybe you can speak to, or certainly my colleagues can think about the efficacy of choosing one path so explicitly today when it seems that we really don't have any certainty around whether we'll be able to do it. And by the time we know, we'll have missed the window to really engage with the stakeholders and the other side of the conversation. So can we do both, I guess is my question. Excuse me.
So I would say yes, with some caveats. I think we obviously can do public outreach on the city's budget situation, the options that the council is considering. I think, just based on the polling data, the TOT doesn't, information doesn't really change the outcome of how people feel about a TOT increase. I think the reason that staff is looking at and has recommended the real property transfer tax is the economic engine that is our tourism economy, and really wanting to sort of be protective of that. Tourism provides 50% of our sales tax revenue. Our TOT is a huge amount of the general fund. Well, and it's a more, if you're looking at it from an economic perspective, it's a more elastic spending category. People have to buy houses, and they may choose to opt out of a $5 million house necessarily, but it's a more inelastic good than vacationing or tourism. And so I think we were trying to weigh the options, and so I think there's less specific education that would need to be done with the voters on a TOT increase than there is on a real property transfer tax. But I think the conversation with specific stakeholder groups, like our hotel community, Visit Santa Barbara, can continue throughout the spring. And then we can look and think about what the sort of public outreach and education would be with the general population.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes some sense, makes good sense for sure, though I will admit that the numbers on the TOT and the general support that currently exists within the community to pass that seem to militate in favor of exploring in that direction, given especially that the city can't really be involved in the campaigning around this other than education. So I just have some concerns there, but I do certainly agree and want to uplift seeing so many of our and appreciate that. But simultaneously, I think maybe a part of this conversation that has not been prioritized enough is the impact that this may have on our realtor community, who are also community members and neighbors of ours. And so I have some similar concerns about just the framing between these two choices and the way we seem to prioritize one industry so strongly over another without seeming to really stop and recognize that they too are our neighbors. So can you speak a little bit about what, I know that you've had many conversations up to now with our realtor community, what has that outreach looked like, and maybe speak a little bit more in depth about what that engagement will look like if we move forward with this conversation in the coming months.
And just to clarify, I'm not saying one industry is better or more important to this than other. They're obviously all very important, just in terms of elasticity of demand and looking at sort of user choices. Hotels are definitely staying at a hotel is a luxury item versus having buying a house at a certain price point. So I think that was just, I was looking at it purely from that, not
Yes.
assigning value to any community member.
That was my framing, not yours. That was all me.
That being said, happy to continue the conversation with all of the interested parties throughout the spring. I think there are definitely just hearing concerns. Are there ways that we could make it less impactful, ways that it could be structured? So I absolutely open to those conversations, whether with groups, smaller groups, or individuals.
Thank you so much. And just one more follow-up, if I may, Mayor. To that point, recognizing the importance of having some middle tier, just for the purposes of getting transactions. I didn't see this in the letters that we received from the realtor community, but have you heard anything about whether there is some point at which their comfort level with this increases? Is it, if we set it at 5 million, there's a more comfort with it, or is that something that really we've just pushed off until this conversation?
I think we've pushed that off until this conversation. I think we wanted to get a read from the full council of whether you wanted us to pursue that first, and then we're happy to engage in those conversations.
Awesome. I would be interested in hearing that in public comment as well, in case anyone's. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mayor.
All right, very good. Mr. DiMartini, one kind of comment question on the poll, is the survey was, it showed the cost of living and housing to be a very high concern, but it showed the local taxes not a very big concern. So there seemed to be a disconnect between those two, which is kind of interesting. I just kind of wonder how the question was posed, but that's just one of those things. You mentioned the county in terms of this tax, the transfer tax. So is there county participation in the property transfer tax if we do this extra $9 along with 55 cents, whatever it is?
Mayor Rouse, I believe the county does collect some, like a documentary transfer tax. I'm not exactly sure what their rate is, but What is being proposed to you today, what was pulled, would be just the additional tax for properties in the city. So this is truly a city tax.
So
None of this.
revenues would remain in the city?
Correct. It would not go to the county.
All right, very good. And are the numbers, the projected numbers are they based on all the properties, commercial, residential, multifamily, the whole shoot and match? So this particular proposal would include multifamily rentals, would include commercial properties, all those things? Okay.
Mayor Rouse, yes, it would.
Yes, okay, very important to know. There were some statistics shown in the exhibits about what happened with, COVID. Obviously, we had a big peak, and then we had a little bit of a slide, and now we're into the hinter world of really not knowing what's going on with property values. So that would be interesting. I don't know how you try to project that. I don't think you really probably can. But that is a concern when we go out on assessed value and say what something's worth or what something will be worth, or, and as Ms. McAdoo mentioned, it is a volatile thing to look at.
No.
Mayor Rouse, yes, it is volatile, and you can see, I think this graph is a good example of that, where, sort of the 2 years post-COVID, you saw the number of transactions go up substantially. And then now, the last 3 years, the number of transactions each year is pretty far below sort of the run rate pre-COVID, right? So we're kind of in this new normal. Interest rates, I'm sure, were a major factor as to why so far fewer homes changed ownership. Also, the sale price has gone up. The real property transfer tax is a leading indicator for our property tax revenue also, because it takes probably between 12 to 18 months for a property to get reassessed by the county assessor's office to when that property tax is actually collected and then brought over to the city. And our property tax has stayed very steady, even during COVID, over that time horizon. But this one is more volatile, as you can see with this graph as a leading indicator. So,
And I would just add to that, one of the things I would recommend as we're having the conversation throughout the spring is that there's sort of, as you saw, a baseline of around $1 million of revenue that we're getting a year from this. If we reset the rate, there will be kind of that new baseline, which we're saying will be somewhere in the $5 to $6 million range. I would be very cautious about sort of officially programming or prioritizing more than that in a year, but then having the council determine like criteria. If we exceed that revenue amount, how is that revenue allocated? What would that look like? What would it be spent on? And looking at more sort of one-time appropriations or things. And, having worked in a number of other cities where we've done this and increased property transfer tax, setting sort of a baseline revenue and then, having policies of what happens if there's more revenue than that baseline.
So as a private property, it converts over to a nonprofit. I'll use the Sotaro building as an example. It's sold to UCSB. And so it's going into the world of nonprofit, which obviously takes the property taxes away. At that point of transfer, would something like this be assessed, or is that also off the table because it's going to a nonprofit?
Mayor Rouse, I believe in that particular example, the property does get reassessed, but then the property tax is no longer applicable on the property. So a nonprofit or a governmental entity does not have to pay property taxes.
So, but the transfer tax would be
I believe the transfer tax
applicable.
does apply.
Okay, that's good to know. And the last thing was, clearly this is new because of our initiative going towards rent control and all that, but is Costa-Hawkins programmed anywhere into this thought process or whatever? Because obviously a multifamily property before 1995 is going to have a different valuation issue than post. So that's still kind of too much in the weeds.
Yeah, staff did not make an assumption about that.
I'm just torturing you, man. I love doing that kind of thing. Okay.
Well, Honorable, I also
Doymas.
wanted to be careful that I don't think even that would have a different valuation in terms of how it would go about. So whether it's Costa-Hawkins or not, I wouldn't look at it that way. It would just be the general.
I get that. I
pricing.
just have an opinion about what may happen in the valuation. Anecdotal. Yeah. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Most of my questions were already asked, in particular about the litigation or other areas. So I just have two follow-up questions. To the point that the sales have kind of flattened out in the last couple of years, would there be any risk that this would flatten them out even more and thus lead to a reduction in sales and then ultimately in properties getting reassessed so the property tax could go down?
Councilmember Freeman, I don't know, I'm not an economist, so I can't project that. But what I can say is offer my professional opinion based on this data and knowing our revenues. It doesn't appear that if we raise it to the level proposed, that it would have a significant impact on reducing the number of transactions or necessarily changing the buyer or seller behavior materially to warrant any major change in the real estate economy. We don't think that would occur, but again, that would be something we would closely monitor.
Just wanted to ask that. And then the other question, it goes to the TOT. I know some in the audience might be able to answer this if we can't, but what are other jurisdictions, TOTs in particular locally, the county, Carpinteria, Goleta, and then if we have any other comparable cities to us in the state, what are their ranges and what is ours? If you could.
Yes, Councilmember Freeman, our current transient occupancy tax rate is 12%. We have 10% of that comes into the general fund, and then a number of years ago, the voters passed Measure B, which is the additional 2%, which goes towards creek restoration projects. That was a special tax that voters approved, so the total rate right now is 12%. Many cities across California are at 12%. Some of them are at 13 or 14%, and just in the election, when Measure I was passed, the county, I think it was Buellton, a couple of other cities in Santa Barbara County increased it from 12% to 14%. I know that Visit Santa Barbara commissioned a study that I know Ms. Janega Dykes communicated to council a while ago, indicating what other cities' tax rates are. So there is a range. Some are 10% still, some go up to 14 or even 15%.
Ms. Santa Maria.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Just a couple of follow-up questions. If we could go to slide 45, please. Could you share with us where exactly we got the $9.50 per 1,000? Where did that number come from? Or how did we arrive at that number?
Yes. Councilmember Santa Maria. That number was proposed as we were conducting this sort of sensitivity analysis on trying to understand the balancing between all the factors that we were considering. Also, knowing that $9.50 was just one digit for the dollar, it wasn't two digits, so it didn't reach $10 or higher. We knew that was a consideration. We also looked at the rates that are implemented in these 5 other cities. We looked at these, knowing that the $9.50 was definitely not near the highest, what some of these cities were being proposed, but not at the lowest, like $3.30. So it was a high enough tax rate increase to be material, but not necessarily overly burdensome for the majority of homeowners or sellers that may be impacted by the increased tax rate.
Okay, thank you. If we were looking at in the same, or actually back to slide 45, if we can go back. If we take a look at the proposed tax says $9.50 per 1,000 for 3 million or higher, option 1 says $40 per every 1,000 for 5 million or higher. Is that something that if we gave direction to do that, I'm assuming we would want to go back out to the community, get feedback on how that would impact, right? Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it feels premature to choose one of those other options if we haven't been able to do that outreach. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, and I think this was simply, I think, illustrative to show kind of what revenue generation would look like in different sort of formats and formulas. I don't know that this is what we would recommend or what we're recommending. Okay. I think definitely sort of would like to get some preliminary thoughts and direction from the council today. That would then inform our outreach, and I think we would probably try to do a tracking poll again before we came back to council in June to put it on the ballot, and we'd have kind of land on a final proposed number and then do a tracking poll in June to know where we are at that point.
Okay, thank you. And at that point, we'll also be evaluating probably the status of litigation, correct? Okay. Mayor Rouse, is this a time to make comments as well, or are we just doing questions?
No, because we have speakers.
Okay. I will hold my comments. Thank you.
Very good. We have a fair amount of speakers. I'd like to be able to get this done within an hour and a half or so. So if we could go 2 minutes, if you would, please. You can combine with another speaker to get 4. But hopefully he can get it done in 2 minutes. So we'll start with Mark Redmond.
Hey, we're living in another day of paradise, aren't we, Kelly? Kelly McAdoo, you're doing a good job. Go KU. You're my alma mater, too. Afternoon, Mayor Randy Roush, Eric Friedman, Wendy, Santa Maria. I bet you were born in Santa Maria. You're pretty like the city. Oscar Gutierrez, and we've got Kristen. She's running for mayor. Eric. Anybody else? I'm running for mayor. I do a podcast. I spend 20, 30 hours a week. I don't want any more souls, young or old alike, to die of fentanyl that is in everything. And it's imported from China, and it gets to our cities through other places besides Mexico. You know, Colombia, Venezuela, any way they can get it here by boat, tunnel, truck, air, you know, carry it on your back through the mountains. Anyway, my big concern is to bring these kids awareness that if they take it, their mother or father that raised them for 20 years will be crying at their
Excuse me,
cremation.
Mr. Redmond,
So
we're speaking to the item on the agenda right now.
Okay,
This is
the
not
item on
general
the
public
agenda
comment.
is, I got that too. But I wanted to say what my main purpose in life is right now, you know, children are our future. But the item I wanted to discuss was that on that back page, I agree with having the solar power there at the police station. And I think Kelly McAdoo's doing a good job recommending that the council accept the reading of the title only and the ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the city administrator to execute the Second Amendment affordability control covenant imposed on the real property with the Turner Lighthouse. And I don't have my glasses or I'd be able to read faster. All I want to do is make everybody unite in this city. I'm tired of the fighting, and I want everyone to be able to afford to live here. I can barely do it on my railroad retirement.
I think you're given enough leeway that item's not
At the end of my, I got
Greg
6
Leach.
seconds.
No, you're done,
Everyone
Mr.
have a great day. I know I will.
Greg Leach.
Oh, my son's birthday is March 5th.
That's great.
That's my son on my.
I'd like some, okay, let's have some order in the chambers, please. Thank you. Mr. Leach.
I'm the first. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Council Member Harmon, I share your heartburn after watching that presentation. I'm here to express serious concerns about the proposed transfer tax increase. First, the scale of this proposal is extreme. Raising transfer tax from $1.10 per thousand, it's not 55, to $10.60 per thousand on sales over $3 million is nearly tenfold increase. For many long-time Santa Barbara homeowners, that could mean a closing bill exceeding $33,000, a substantial burden at the moment someone is already making a major life decision. Second, this comes on top of an existing financial pressures. Property owners already pay significant property taxes, school parcel taxes, rising insurance premiums, and higher utility costs. Layering heavy tax burdens simply adds to unsustainable cumulative burden. Third, the local market context matters. The median home price in Santa Barbara in 2025 was approximately $2.3 million, and in January 26, it's around $2.5 million, underscoring that what may be labeled luxury here is increasingly the norm for long-term residents, not a sign of extraordinary wealth. This tax unfairly penalizes the very people who kept this city vibrant for decades. Rather than discouraging sales, the city should consider policies that encourage turnover. When a long-term owner sells, properties are reassessed at current market value, naturally growing property tax revenue without imposing punitive charges. Fiscal responsibility is also essential. Before asking residents for more money, the city should commit to operating within existing budgets and prioritizing efficiency and disciplined spending. Government, like households, should live within its means.
Thank you, Mr. Leach.
I got one more. Lastly,
We're gradually seeing an erosion of property rights through layers of taxation and regulation. Each new mandate makes it harder for residents and landlords to own, maintain, and transfer property here. The trend should concern everyone who cares about Santa Barbara's future. I respectfully urge the council to reconsider this proposal and explore alternatives that do not place disproportionate burdens on longtime residents.
Thank you. Kathy Janega Dykes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Kathy Janega Dykes. I'm president and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. I want to speak candidly because this issue really matters to the health of our local economy. Tourism is not just a nice to have in the city of Santa Barbara. It's one of our most reliable economic engines. It supports thousands of jobs, drives business for hundreds of small and locally owned companies, and generates millions of dollars annually that help fund the city services our residents depend on. Because of how important this industry is, we commissioned an independent economic study to analyze the potential impacts of increasing the transient occupancy tax. And you all received a copy of this report, and in that report does provide a competitive analysis of other communities' TOT. But the data is very clear. While a TOT increase may generate short-term revenue gains, those gains begin to erode over time as higher lodging costs reduce visitor demand. The study projects fewer overnight stays, reduced visitor spending across our local economy, and ultimately fewer jobs supported by tourism. And the ripple effect is significant. When visitor demand drops, it doesn't just impact our hotels, and I think that's also something that people assume. It affects restaurant workers, housekeepers, retail employees, tour operators, transportation providers, and so many small businesses. These are real people and real families who depend on a stable economy. Instead, I would encourage us to step back and really ask a bigger question. Instead of placing additional financial pressure on one of our strongest revenue generators, how do we support it and begin to nurture it so it continues to grow? Supporting tourism means supporting small businesses, protecting jobs, and maintaining consistent tax revenue for the city over the long term.
Thank you very much. Millie Matz.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Millie Matz. I'm with the Santa Barbara Hotel Collection, which includes the Brisas Del Mar Inn at the Beach, the Lavender Inn by the Sea, the Inn by the Harbor, and the Best Western Plus Santa Barbara on Bath Street. Since the 1960s, the Santa Barbara Hotel Collection has operated as a family-owned group of 4 boutique hotels. Founded by Pamela Weber and her daughter Jeanette, our organization is deeply rooted in this community, and we are writing to express our strong opposition to the proposed TOT tax increase. Today, we employ over 100 people who rely on the success of our hotels. We oppose the TOT increase because of the direct negative impact it will have on our workforce. As noted in the Economic Impacts Report, such an increase risks driving visitors to competing destinations. A decline in tourism doesn't just hurt our bottom line, it directly threatens the livelihoods of our employees, our neighbors. A 2% increase coupled with soaring insurance and healthcare premiums leaves little room for property improvements and wage growth our team deserves. If higher taxes drive visitors to other destinations, it is our employees who will feel it first through lost hours and reduced job security. For over 60 years, we have proudly supported Santa Barbara. We urge you to consider the long-term economic risks of this proposal over short-term revenue gains. Thank you.
Thank you. Forgive me if I get this wrong. Dane, is it Gorey? Got kind of a flamboyant writing style.
Horseshoes and hand grenades. You're close.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Dane Gorup, General Manager of Hilton Santa Barbara. So great to be here. Also representing the largest hotel within the community as well. And as Kathy had shared, the report notes also that the segment that will be most impacted will be our group customer. Our groups make up a large portion of our annual rooms consumption. The ability to attract and contract groups provides the opportunity to create compression that will provide demand for other hotels around Santa Barbara that also pay the TOT. These groups support the business of restaurants, retail, and recreational activities. Not to mention jobs, purchasing, transportation, and other businesses associated with the hospitality industry. Budgets within our group customers are typically fixed, and this increase may take our destination out of consideration. Also, many of the groups we host are local companies that would also be very impactful should they decide to take their business out of the county. Downstream of the increase puts us at a competitive disadvantage to alternative cities up and down the coast, as well as within destinations in the western United States. Once lost, it will be a real challenge to solicit and market a compelling proposition for these groups to return. This financial impact to a group's budget will certainly be used against us in Santa Barbara as a group destinations by competing hotels. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Rob Fredericks.
Mayor Rouse and council members, I want to begin by acknowledging the seriousness of the city's fiscal outlook, a projected $14.6 million deficit next year, reserves on track to be depleted, and flat revenues are not small challenges. I understand why new revenue is being considered. But as you consider increasing the transient occupancy tax or the property transfer tax, I urge you not to lose sight of the most pressing structural issue in our community, the lack of reliable, dedicated funding source for affordable housing. The polling confirms what we already know. Housing affordability is voters' top concern. Yet under the current proposal, even if the city generates 10 to 11 million in new revenue, we are still facing a gap, and none of that revenue is structurally dedicated to the Housing Trust Fund. That means affordable housing will once again compete annually with every other general fund priority. We've seen how that plays out: uncertainty, delays, and projects hanging by a thread with nonprofit developers trying to close multi-layered financing stacks. Housing is infrastructure. It requires predictable capital, not episodic allocations. I strongly urge you to do two things when considering moving forward. First, ensure that housing is explicitly included as a priority use of funds. Second, embed oversight language directly into the ballot measure, not just a promise. If the Measure C Oversight Committee is used, then the ballot language should require representation from at least 2 housing finance or development experts. Transparency and accountability build voter trust. The question before you is not whether housing matters. It does. The question is whether we continue managing it through annual discretionary debates or finally create a disciplined, predictable funding structure that allows us to leverage state and federal dollars and deliver results as envisioned and set forth in the city's adopted housing element. Thank you.
Thank you. Dustin Hoyseth.
Hello, Mayor Rouse and council members. My name is Dustin Hoyseth, Director of Economic Development with the Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce, representing business interests from Goleta to Carpinteria. I'd like to focus specifically on the economic impacts of a proposed increase in the transient occupancy tax from 12 to 14%. The recent Oxford Economics report shared by Visit Santa Barbara has some important points for today's discussion. Economic modeling of an increase to 14% shows measurable impacts. Even relatively small price increases can reduce demand. Projections indicate hotel room demand would decline, resulting in nearly 10,000 fewer rooms a night annually. This translates into roughly $15 million in lost local business sales each year and an average of more than 70 fewer jobs. This is throughout the community, not just hotels. Over a 10-year period, those impacts compound for approximately $150 million in reduced business sales and roughly $45 million in lost wages circulating through the local economy. Yes, TOT revenue is projected to increase on the order of $5 to $6 million annually, but that gross increase must be weighed against the reductions in other local tax revenues that depend upon visitor spending, as well as the broader economic activity. There's also an issue of competitiveness. Yes, some other local jurisdictions are at 14%, but at that number, Santa Barbara would be sitting at the very top of this competitive set, and local lodging tax and assessments. These pricing differences influence site selection decisions, particularly with large group travel. The Chamber asks that the Council weigh not only the projected gross revenue of a TOT increase, but long-term net economic impact, competitiveness, as well as the ballot feasibility. We share the goal of fiscal stability. We simply urge caution in advancing a policy that could unintentionally weaken one of Santa Barbara's primary economic drivers. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Kristen Miller.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rouse and council members. I'm Kristen Miller, President and CEO of the Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce, representing 850 members and 75,000 jobs on the South Coast. We are here today as champions of business and local hospitality businesses. All of us in the room today know that the hospitality industry is more than just a revenue source. It's a cornerstone of Santa Barbara's identity and our economy. Our hotels, restaurants, retailers, and event venues don't simply serve visitors. They support thousands of local jobs, generate tax revenue that funds public safety and essential services, and sustain the small businesses that give Santa Barbara its character. Tourism is one of our economic engines that brings outside dollars into our economy at scale. These dollars circulate from hotel staff to restaurant workers to local suppliers to storefront businesses. We're concerned that increasing taxes actually weakens the city's primary economic engines. Santa Barbara is a competitive environment. Visitors make choices, commercial investment makes choices, meeting planners make choices, and group business can move. The Chamber respectfully urges the Council to consider the broader economic ecosystem. We support long-term financial planning and fiscal sustainability, but urge caution in placing additional tax measures on industries that fuel so much of Santa Barbara's economic vitality. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Obligacion. If I got that right. Okay, I'll take that.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, I'm Gary Obligacion, General Manager of El Encanto. Great presentation today. That was fantastic. You had a couple of things that actually seemed almost in conflict to me. You said cost of housing, cost of living, lack of affordable housing were the three most key initiatives, and yet there was a fourth piece that you put out there that you said that for most people, tourism does not impact my everyday life. We talked about the economic engine that is tourism in this community and in the city of Santa Barbara. It is not a matter of increasing the TOT, it's increasing traffic. We got to figure out how to get more people here, get them paying more, and then feed that machine in every single way we can. I do say do not raise that tax, but let's explore every single option we possibly can to make sure we're doing the right thing for this community, period. That's it. Thank you.
John, I believe it's Hummel.
Good afternoon. John Hummel, longtime resident, retiree, owner, creator of Free Walking Tours, Santa Barbara. Increasing the TOT from 12 to 14% ignores the existing 2% tourism fee paid by the hotel guest, creating an all-in rate of 16%, which would tie us for the highest in California. This isn't just a tax, it's a shift in our identity that risks turning Santa Barbara into an exclusive enclave. At the recent tourism summit, I asked a panel participant if he thought we were becoming a destination only for the wealthy. Without hesitating, he said yes. And when I asked him to size up the local hospitality scene, he said, quote, "I'm really concerned about the mid-range hotels, many of which are family-owned, like the Eagle Inn. They are really getting squeezed," end quote. I asked AI for a cost comparison between Santa Barbara, San Diego, and Santa Monica for a family of 4 for a 2-day stay. Santa Barbara was 20% more costly. At the Tourism Summit, we learned that visits to California were down the last 2 years, and 2026 will be the same or worse. Is this really the time to raise the TOT? Staff came up with 200 revenue enhancement and cost management options, yet council elected to focus on raising taxes. Taxing our way out of the structural deficit while ignoring its primary driver, labor costs, won't work. 2 years ago, voters stepped up by approving a sales tax increase. Before we ask visitors and residents to pay more, the city needs to step up and demonstrate it can make the necessary step to put its fiscal house on a sustainable path. I would also add, since the council looks to be looking at tax increment financing for downtown, which poses a risk to the general fund, it's important you get your general fund in order. In closing, when I was in my 30s, I was working as a division manager for the city of Mountain View. We were going through tough times, just like you are. Staff devised a list, similar to your list of 200. On that list was a departmental reorganization plan I had developed. At that time, I didn't think my idea would be adopted, but it was, and I lost my job. Looking back at that, after all these years, city manager made the right call. Tough decisions for tough times had to be made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Klein.
Honorable Mayor, Mayor Rouse, and members of the City Council, thank you. I've been before you several times in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know that I've ever had a more passionate reason to be before you. It is true the City of Santa Barbara's hotel industry is the cornerstone of this local economy. It generates over $1 billion in annual business sales. It supports 8,122 jobs at the very least. Any change to TOT has implications well beyond hotel operators and flows, as you've heard from many other speakers. Implore you to reread, if you haven't already spent some time with the Oxford Economics Report. I believe that this information is very valuable. An increase in TOT increases the cost of a hotel stay. It makes us less competitive. It leads to fewer visitors, lower visitor spending. It affects the visitor economy. This data is in front of you. I think it's very obvious. Let's talk about a human impact. Many of the people who work in hotels, the 8,122, are your constituents, our citizens, our neighbors, and they will be impacted. We talk about affordable housing. It is critical. It's also critical to be able to afford one's housing. And if incomes reduce, it will be very difficult to afford one's housing. I'd like to read some names. These people work with me every day. They will be negatively impacted. Seferina, Edith, Francisco, Jonathan, Isabella and Isabel, Diego, Jesus, Maddie, Soledad, Gabby, Alex, Javier, Michaela, Nellie, Christine, Leo, Natalia, Elizabeth, Dimitri, and Keith, and Matt, and Letty, and Anthony. Please be very careful in this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Brian Johnson. And you have Pat Costello donating her time to you, so you have 4 minutes. Madam Clerk, can I have 4 minutes on the timer, please?
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members. Thank you. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. We have approximately 1,200 members along the South Coast. I think you've heard from around 240 of them so far about this issue over the last 2 days. Before this council considers any new property-based tax, it's worth taking stock of what owners already pay. Property owners here contribute through the Prop 13 base rate, voter-approved school and community college parcel taxes, special district assessments, the city's utility users tax, and the recently increased 9.25 local sales tax. That's before they even decide to sell. Then there are the escrow and closing fees, moving costs, and the massive capital gains tax that occurs upon the sale of a property. Homeowners are also absorbing skyrocketing insurance premiums, rising utility costs, and growing regulatory compliance requirements tied to inspections, energy standards, and permitting. This proposed transfer tax does not exist in a vacuum. It lands on top of an already crushing cumulative burden. We've already talked about how this isn't just an addition to 55 cents per $1,000. It's already $1.10 in total, and adding $9.50 to it would increase it to $10.60, almost a tenfold increase. It's not a mansion, it's a home. The $3 million trigger is frequently described as targeting luxury properties, but inside Santa Barbara city limits, that threshold captures long-held family homes that have simply appreciated over decades. Neighborhoods like the Riviera, San Roque, the Upper East, the Mesa regularly see sales at or above this level, not because the sellers are wealthy investors, but because they are longtime residents whose modest homes have risen in value through no particular action of their own. Taxing them heavily at the moment of sale, often during retirement, estate settlement, divorce, or a health-driven move compounds financial strain during already one of life's most difficult circumstances. Of the approximately, number of homes that are currently on the market right now in the city of Santa Barbara, approximately 25% of them are $3 million and over. That's a lot. That's not minuscule and it's not insignificant. This is a point that deserves far more attention than it has received. The tax applies exclusively within the Santa Barbara city limits, not in Montecito, not in Hope Ranch, not in Goleta, not in the unincorporated county. We talk about it being an inelastic demand. Well, there are plenty of cities for people to consider outside of the city of Santa Barbara. A buyer weighing a $3.5 million home inside city limits versus a comparable property just outside will now face a material higher transaction cost for that city property. Sellers know this and will feel it in their negotiations, and over time, the asymmetry suppresses demand and price appreciation specifically within the city's boundaries, eroding the very property tax base the city depends on to fund services. While it may sound great to have a lower home price, this will in time erode the tax base that the council is seeking to prop up using its budget. The council would be creating a self-inflicted competitive wound. This is not speculation, it's well documented in economic literature. Higher transfer taxes discourage sales, limit turnover, and constrain supply, particularly in markets like ours where inventory is already severely limited. Fewer transactions means less economic activity for escrow officers, title companies, agents, attorneys, contractors, inspectors, and the many small local businesses that depend on a healthy real estate market. In 2024, the real estate industry accounted for over 17% of total gross state product for California. Reducing that will hurt in multiple areas. It slows reassessment growth, weakens the broader property tax basis, and the schools that it supports. Homeowners aren't an ATM, and I hope that you all realize that and think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Snyder?
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes. My name is Tim Snyder. I'm the president of Fess Parker Winery, also on the Visit Santa Barbara board, and past president of the board of the Santa Barbara Vintners Association. Nice to be in front of you here today. We are a family company. We've been around for almost 4 decades now, and our 3rd generation is working for us, which is great, something that we're excited about and proud of. We're talking a lot about the revenue side here. I think it's important to talk about the cost side and the negative impacts, which we're now getting to. And it's true that there's going to be a negative impact no matter what direction we decide to pursue. I think the question in front of us needs to be the breadth of that impact and where is that going to land. And I think if we're talking about increasing these TOT taxes right now, it's not just the hotel business, it's us, it's our businesses. So, it's our tasting rooms that are affected, it's restaurants that are affected. It's a trickle-down effect that has broad reach in our community. We're talking about, nearly half of our economy being, local economy being tied to tourism. I just feel like there's too much risk right now to be throwing more headwinds against small businesses that we just saw are a priority in the polling of our own community, retaining small businesses, supporting small businesses, 89% and 75% in the polling data. It's important to our community. It's the lifeblood of our community. It's what we've built our community upon. Let's keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you. Andrew Firestone?
Good afternoon, Andrew Firestone. I'm a member at Visit Santa Barbara, also on the T-Bid board. 19 years I've been working in hospitality in Santa Barbara, and I want to start off with a compliment. I think Santa Barbara and the hospitality world have an incredible, great working relationship. Through COVID, through the economic downturn, through fires, mudslides, we've been in lockstep with each other in support. Facing this TOT increase worries me tremendously. And a lot of the points have been touched on earlier, group business. But one of the things that the gentleman said over here about the affordability and what is the image of Santa Barbara. I represent a affordable category of hotel. And all of my hotel rooms have pull-out couches because we have families that want to come to Santa Barbara and they'd like to stay at some hotels but need to stay at mine. And that is an important category of visitor to support. And we don't want to price them out of coming to Santa Barbara. And what I would urge you to do up on the dais is to look inside and say, would I be impacted, or would my decision about where to go be changed if it were more expensive? And I bet you would say yes. And so what we're trying to do here is not only support tourism, we want to support restaurants, we want to support museums, State Street, all the things. It's not just about hotels. It's about all the ancillary things that go around hotels that bring visitors here. We house them, sure, we house them. But then we send them into Santa Barbara to go spend money, to experience the glory of Santa Barbara. And making it more difficult, I think, would be a big mistake and making it more expensive. I want to touch quickly, Councilman, you were talking about the comparable rates. Some rates are higher in other places, but they're supporting things like a convention center. They're subsidizing big community spaces that we don't have here in Santa Barbara. And I will say, I have hotels up in San Luis Obispo. There is nobody cheering this increase on more than San Luis Obispo. They would love to see Santa Barbara go to 14%. So would most of California. So please think about the impact to not just hotels, but all of tourism-facing businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Robinson?
Mayor, Housing Council, my name is Laura Robinson, Executive Director of SEIU Local 620, representing city staff. And I am here today certainly not as a champion of businesses or the business class, but as a champion of the people and the working class. As you review the proposed revenue enhancements, I want to emphasize how critical it is that the city pursue every reasonable option that will help restore long-term financial stability. Many of the measures under consideration, particularly those that are progressive in nature, offer a path forward that does not place additional burden on the residents who are already struggling. An increase to the TOT tax is one of the clearest examples. Visitors, not local families, shoulder that cost, and the revenue directly supports the services that make Santa Barbara a place that people want to visit in the first place. Similarly, a property transfer tax on high-value transaction asks a little bit more from those who can afford it most, for the ongoing benefit of the entire community. These are reasonable, equitable tools that help stabilize the city without deepening hardship for the people who live and work here. I also want to remind the City Council that city workers stood with you in advocating for Measure I. We did that because we understood what was at stake: continued services, community stability, and the long-term health of this organization. And those services are not abstract. They are provided by the people who make this city run every day, your staff. As we continue to wait for the implementation of class and comp, now approaching 4 years, the lowest paid employees remain the ones still waiting for relief. Safety and leadership classifications have already been addressed, but the workers at the bottom of the wage scale and the ones impacted by the cost of living are still in crisis. Promises have been made, both publicly and privately, that the city had worked to get these employees out of the crisis, and those commitments matter. So for all these reasons, and because the community cannot function without a stable, supported workforce, I urge the council to move forward with placing these revenue measures on the ballot. They are also necessary, they are fair, and they are part of the broader commitment to ensuring that Santa Barbara remains a city where services are strong, workers are valued, and the community as a whole can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Speakers online, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have 2 speakers. We have Richard Applebaum and then Trey Pinner. Richard Applebaum, please go ahead.
Thank you. Dear Mayor Rouse, members of City Council, I'm Rich Applebaum, co-chair of CLUE, Santa Barbara's Housing Justice Group. First, a shout out to city staff and especially Finance Director DiMartini for this exhaustive analysis of what needs to be done to get the additional funding we need, both because our reserves are being depleted or will be depleted, and we have desperate housing needs. I'll make 3 points. You have a letter from me which has more detail. First, a significant amount of funds, must be allocated to affordable housing. While anything raised through a city council ballot measure has to go into the general fund and cannot be legally obligated for housing, CLU would not support a measure without clearly expressed priorities for possible funding, for possible spending, including specific dollar amounts. This is the approach used by the Hayward City Council back in 2014, and there's a link to that in my letter. Second, based on the survey, 4 out of 5 respondents rated affordable workforce housing as extremely or very important to themselves, not in general, but on a personal level, with more than half, 55%, rating it as very important, which is the same as for fire and paramedic response. Affordable housing is a top priority, up there with fire protection. Third, and most important, if the city does pursue the real property transfer tax, it should set a much higher tax rate on sales than the proposed $9.50 per thousand, which is less than 1%. As you've seen just now, tweaking both the minimal property value from 3 to 5 million and the tax rate to say 40 per thousand can increase projected revenues to as much as 17 to 18 million. I totally understand that sharp fluctuations in commercial property sales can make yearly projections difficult. But if the city is going to put this on the ballot, it should really shoot for the highest likely long-term returns with rates comparable to other cities. You've seen that Los Angeles Metro ULA is 4%, Santa Monica 5.6%, Culver City, Palo Alto, and Mountain View 3 to 4%. So please look seriously into different sales prices and higher tax alternatives than 1% before you make a final decision. More sensitivity analysis, another tracking poll with different numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Applebaum. That's time. Next speaker, please.
Okay, our final speaker is Trey Pinner. Trey Pinner, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. 3 points I just wanted to make. Hearing the report today from the firm that was hired, there seems to be some significant concern that actually either one of these proposed measures are a viable measure. So I think some more analysis of that is important for us before moving forward on it. Secondly, I think there needs to be way more clarity and discussion about that this revenue is to be geared specifically to housing issues. Even in many of your commenters today, they've talked about general revenues and enhanced services and things of that nature. If my understanding is correct, this measure is to be geared specifically to housing. And I think there's been a lack of clarity on how those dollars would be spent. Although I do believe it is an important issue to address, and I think it is important for the city to be addressing those matters. So I'm not suggesting it's a wrong direction. I'm just suggesting there's been very little clarity that this is what this measure is to address and handle. And third, I probably have a very contradictory comment to your just recent commenter that I do not believe the tiered approach for transfer tax on sales for real estate should be at a tiered level. I actually would follow more the Palo Alto suggestion with a modest increase in our transfer tax and apply it to all properties. It should not be one property pitted against another to pay a higher tax than another property. If the city believes this is an important issue, then the property owners should address it and all address it equally. And so I would much rather see a modest increase in our transfer tax at this point and not these sort of large properties paying an exorbitant rate compared to some other properties. So I think that should be addressed and look at that as a more palatable option. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, further speakers?
No, Mr. Mayor, that's the final speaker.
Okay, with that, then we will bring it back to council for comment and deliberation. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you think this is an uncomfortable conversation, I will tell you that It's nothing about this topic or the choices we have to make is attractive. The run-up on this, the overwhelming community input I've got is pretty much just a general set of take care of your own house first before you come calling to us type of thing. I guess I would say that that's great advice, and this is the action today that we're just having to get this out and talk about it on a timeline is out of sync with a lot of things going on in the background that are exactly that, and many of them that just can't be talked about at this point in time. We start budget discussions in, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, a month, whatever, and some of those will become more obvious. But I think that message, personally, for me at least, I won't act like I'm speaking for anybody else, but I think that message has been heard loud and clear, that there needs to be some shared, well, not maybe from the message standpoint is it shouldn't be shared, but I think when people say the only thing you should be doing is cut expenses and cut services, I always giggle a little bit because nobody really wants to cut services. We all love our services. So also, I'm constantly told by other people to put everything that we discuss and make decisions on the ballot. I get told that all the time. Everything should be on the ballot. And what we're doing here today is while we may be offering an opinion on one choice or the other, we're putting this on the ballot. So the decision that that would come of that is exactly what people ask for, and that's that the community decides this, not the council, and that'll happen. Neither of these are very palatable, but obviously I think something has to happen, and I'll fall back to my old Jerry Brown quote, if we do nothing, we do something, and we need to do something. I'm in favor of a dual track, which I think we've already acknowledged that we will have to do because of legal actions or a pending initiative at the state. But my preference would be to be lined up to have as our priority the property transfer tax. I would agree with staff's recommendation. I will want to get down in the weeds on that and talk about some deviation from what you presented here today. And it took until March, but I'm in total agreement today with Rich Applebaum and Rob Pearson that the result of this has to result and get us out of this just fatal day-to-day inability to find the resources to put towards the Housing Trust Fund and or so low income and workforce housing remedies in this town. I don't know if I can solve to get it out of the discretionary discussion every year, but I think we have to be pursuing, to the extent the law will allow us to prioritize those type of housing development resources. So going along with that, I think we need, as soon as possible, on the front side, not on the back side, a clear resolution of our priority funding choices. And that needs to accompany the outreach that we're doing out there in the community so that we're showing it's not going into a black hole, that we have priorities as much as we legally can do for a not a specific use attempt that resonate with filling gaps that we're just unable to fill in the community. Those. I also think that, as we talked about before, I think internally, I think multifamily or apartment commercial buildings should be exempted. It just seems contradictory to me to say we're interested in fostering increased development or increased upkeep, increased churning an improvement on low-income and workforce housing at the same time we're tacking fees onto that. So, and then just the details on the tiers. I'd like to see us work backwards, and I don't know that, I think we're working forwards and not backwards. I'd like to see us target a certain amount of revenue we want. So let's just make up a number, $10 million. And is that a good number to shoot for in the framework of our prioritization? And then keep the same status for up to $3 million. And then I'd be interested in some form of maybe the recommended one for 3 to 5 million, and then maybe something at 5 million and above that gets us to the 10 million. I mean, it's just a math formula. The 3 to 5 could be less, the 5 could be more than the number, I don't know what it is now, or you could leave it at 950 and show us what 5 is, and then we could say, why don't we put the 950 lower and make the 5 a little higher? But rather than come up with numbers and say, here's what it will generate, I say, what do we need to get to have a credible pot of money that matches the goals of that priority statement, that priority resolution? And if that's $10 million, then how do we get there by looking at the math with at 3 tiers rather than 2 tiers? So that's where I am. Looking forward to hearing all the other 6 opinions that you're going to hear.
I'm just
Thank
wondering
you.
who Rob Pearson is. Reaching back
I
in the
apologize,
past.
Rob. You know who I meant. Okay.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Fredericks, Pearson, whoever you are, Rob. Just 2 clarifying questions that came up from the public. Can you clarify the 55 cents versus the $1.10?
Yes, Councilmember Freeman. So the 55 cent per 1,000 is the city's real property transfer tax rate. There's another 55 cent per 1,000, which I believe is referred to as the documentary transfer tax, which is the county's tax, I believe. And so when you add those together, it's $1.10.
So it's both accurate. There's $1.10, but in terms of the city budget, it's only 55, and that's what we're focused on. Okay. And then the other, just to clarify, Mr. Pinner brought it up. We're not talking about a specific tax because of the 2/3.
That's correct. We're not. This would be legally a general purpose tax measure. Again, the polling results indicate that a special purpose tax would not reach the required 2/3 voter approval threshold. That's what the poll results indicate.
Okay. Thank you. So my comments is probably no surprise. And a lot of what Councilmember Jordan talked about. In particular, what I'm hearing is another tax. You need to get your expenditure side in order at the city. However, he also made a point too that we were not going to solve this just by looking at our reductions in services, because when it comes down to making those decisions in services, not only are they the jobs of our employees, the employees are providing those services. And so, but at the same time, I mean, tough decisions are going to need to be made, because to Mr. Frederick's point, even if both of these measures were adopted and passed, we're still not to the 14 million deficit, and so we don't even have another dollar to put towards affordable housing. And so this gets back to, for me, going back to last year's budget, and it was a 4-3 vote on the budget, and it was myself and Councilmember Jordan and Mayor Rouse voted against the budget. And for me, even the limited time that I had to study it last year, I was worried that we were going to find us right where we are right now, that we were making decisions, and there was a compromise at the time that had been proposed to wait on the fiscal year 27 allocation of some of the funding, and that wasn't met, and we went ahead with it. And that's where the council could have made some decisions differently. Honestly, I felt like we were ignored last year, those of us who were advocating for that, and it's exacerbated the situation right now. And so I think we do need to, one, focus on the 200 recommendations. This is part of them, but the others, to look at other revenue enhancements. We are doing that. There's some creative ideas out there. We need to look at how we can support local businesses to come online, reduce the time it takes for them to go through the process so they can get up and running, and look at new other revenue enhancements, not just taxes. We also do need to look at expenditures as much as we can through efficiencies and looking at our services and what we charge and everything. So the one thing that I'll say is neither one of these are really something I would want to support. It's tough to do so, but again, it's not going to be something that we can solve $14 million and more in the out years just by making cuts. We have to do both. But with that being said, for me right now, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to support either one of them, but I would support, well, first I'll say I'll take off the transient occupancy tax. I think there's a lot of unknowns with that. There's a lot of headwinds that we saw coming, especially with international travel, which is a big part of our travel portfolio. So that would leave the real estate transfer tax. I think it's important to move that discussion forward. I'm not committed to it right now. And the reason is that moving that forward, having those discussions with the community, when it comes back to us, the council will have had an opportunity by then, a couple months from now, to determine whether or not we are able to make some really difficult choices and really put our heads together and come through with this. And for me, that's the key to this, is what are we going to do with working with our staff to be creative and look at the expenditure side. And if that comes through and we are able to do that, then that's a different conversation for us and for the public on whether or not we're putting forward the real estate transfer tax. But just to put it forward and not focus on the expenditure side is not something that's really palatable to me. In particular, one of the things I'm going to be looking at is Measure C. There was comments in last week's public and then in last year's, last week and last year on changing how we allocate Measure C. That's a non-starter for me for a lot of reasons. It was passed as an infrastructure tax, and if we start changing that, it will not allow us to make the difficult conversations that we have. In particular, Measure C, we need to be protective of it because as we learned at Finance Committee last week, it could be a potential source for the affordable housing that we're talking about because that is considered infrastructure, critical infrastructure. And Measure C, that if we protect it, we will have that opportunity to perhaps use it for affordable housing as part of the infrastructure of our city. But if we start changing significantly how it's been used since it started, we might not have that opportunity. The other thing with Measure C is there's a big unknown with the harbor, and the federal funding is not coming through for dredging. And we might be on the hook for possibly over $3.5 million a year. So I raise these because I want that to be what our council is focusing on and in the upcoming budget discussions. And those discussions will take place before this comes back to us, if I'm reading the timeline, or at least be significantly underway. And at that time, I will make a decision whether or not I think we've done our job up here to put the real estate transfer on there. But for right now, the real estate transfer is what I want to move forward. But the big question is, what are we going to do on the expenditure side and protecting Measure C? Thank you.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I was just looking up our Measure C language. I wasn't expecting to need to talk about it today, but I'm going to. So much of this is really confirming of what we've been hearing from the public for years and in these chambers and from constituents, that the most serious problem in the minds of voters includes the cost of living and the lack of affordable housing. We've had this conversation so many times. No one up here wants to raise taxes. I mean, that's never a popular position, doesn't win you any friends. We never want to do that. But I think we also need to be honest that government runs on taxes. That is the source of revenue to be able to provide services for the city, for the community. So what I like about what's on the table today is that it's adding something to something that already exists. And we do this all the time with increasing our fee structures, taking a look at something over a number of years, and then realizing that it's not bringing in enough revenue and adjusting. And to me, this isn't a new tax. This is, and this is talking about the property transfer tax. This is increasing or bringing up to modern day needs a tax structure that already exists. And I think that makes it a little bit more palatable just on that. It's also, considering increasing it on a segment of property owners that are probably most likely able to make that contribution to the community. And that's how I see it, as a contribution to the community. On terms of the messaging, I really prefer calling it 1% than $9.50 per 1,000. I just think it intuitively makes a lot of sense. And instead of having to translate when we're talking about it, well, that's really like 1% on your two. It just makes it so quick to do that calculation. And if it's 1%, then to Trey Pinner's points, I think it could be a broader segment, actually, thinking about it as 1%, or really any number of these options I think are worth exploring. And that's one reason why I wouldn't want to stay bifurcated in pursuing the two different options, because I'd really like to go deeper into the gradations of the options of the transfer tax, knowing that we could pivot quickly. I think there is general understanding on what a TOT is, not necessarily an understanding on the impacts to workers. So there would be an education component on that. But I think I far prefer the property transfer tax to the TOT. Again, given the new information and the education and the way that this has come about. But I agree with Councilmember Jordan on so many of his points. Figure out the number that we want to need to make and back it out from there, which option gets us there. And I think we could do further focus groups and further dives on that give us more information on that. And to Rich Applebaum's point, if you call it 1%, it might poll differently than the $9.50 per 1,000 on that. And I think we're all in agreement, too, that looking at this and of course, we're looking at efficiencies and ways to take responsibility for our management of funds and really needing to pivot and change direction in some ways on how we reduce spending, not positions, but spending. And we need to take those hard looks, and we have been squeezing down, and we'll continue to squeeze down while also looking at other options. I think also, our housing element that we approved calls for a dedicated, stable funding source for the local housing trust fund. And I'm wondering, and I think I'll ask this again during budget time because I don't want to get too big into budget deliberations right now, but I'm wondering if we just commit to a line item amount for the local housing trust fund, then could that get us out of this constant cycle of, was it Measure I? Is it Measure C being reconfigured? Is it this latest measure? It's a general fund obligation that we commit to, and then it's not tied to any one of these general fund measures.
I think that's absolutely an option. What I would say is, and I think Rob Fredericks will probably throw dagger eyes at me, but it is not a required obligation of the city to fund versus our employee MOUs, other contracts for services, other things that we have. So while it is absolutely a priority and a necessity for the city to find that funding, when push comes to shove and we have to look for things and ways to reduce expenses that are not contractual obligations, that is an easy one to reduce. It's not easy from the impact on the community, but in terms of the legal obligations we have. And so I think it doesn't matter where the money comes from. I think that's going to be the constant challenge. But if you have a revenue stream that is set up and a political promise to dedicate a portion of that revenue stream, makes it harder for councils to do that going forward. So I would just put that forth as kind of the statement on that.
Thank you. And I think it was, as Councilmember Friedman brought up, the last budget cycle, the direction was to allocate 2 years' worth of funding with the direction to come back with sources of revenue generation specifically to be able to keep that funding going. So when we're having that conversation about how much more we're going to squeeze down, one of the reasons we're specifically looking at this or even supporting it is the directive was, we know it's not dedicated, and we've dedicated it for 2 years, and so help us find a way to keep that fund going. So I'm supportive of this in as much as it goes to affordable housing, and that's the local housing trust fund or matching funds for building affordable housing. That is the source of my support for this, and I think that there is a nexus there with, if it is going to funding and addressing housing affordability, then having it come from houses that are more able to share that contribution, and I see that pretty clearly. And I'm a homeowner. I understand that, I have my property taxes too, and my bond measures, and my school taxes, and the insurance, and all of those go up, and I understand that. But I also really understand that housing values appreciate even without doing any improvements. And when it comes time to sell, if some of that goes back at 1%, goes back to the city to go toward affordable housing, I see that as palatable. I mean, nobody's excited about this. You're not going to get excitement generated for increasing taxes, but I think of the issues, then this is the one that makes the most sense to me, is having a nexus to the affordable housing. And I guess I'll save my Measure C discussion for the budget deliberations. And at that time, I'll ask that we pull up the Measure C language, that we have that available to us, that we really talk about that the number one priority on that was services having to do with public safety. So that's neither here nor there for me today in this discussion. But I will support this in as much as it goes toward affordable housing and supporting looking at multiple tiers in that. I would like to keep multifamily homes in there, or properties in there. But, if we're going to do this and it's going to go to the voters, getting $5 or $6 million versus something that would really have us stop having this conversation over and over, I'm interested in the other options, 1, 2, or 3, to see how that polls and how that goes.
Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, well, I have to admit I'm having like a lies, and damn statistics moment up here, because we're talking about 1%, which of course $10 is 1% of $1,000, but on the $3 million sale price, the current tax revenue is $1,650, proposed to go up to $28,500. That's actually a 1,600% increase to that specific homeowner, right? I mean, that's not 1%. Please, sorry.
It's 1% per $1,000. It would be, so yes, there is a multiplier effect based on the purchase price. So it's not 1% on the total purchase price. It's 1% based on $1,000 of the purchase price.
So thank you. That's
and that's how our
extremely-
current tax is structured.
Totally.
55 cents per $1,000. So you multiply So you divide the purchase price by
So-
1,000 and then multiply by 0.55.
It makes total sense. I think it's imperative that we are incredibly clear about that, because I think anyone might look at a 1% and say, that sounds good, but it's quite different when you think about that in the context of what you are being charged on your $3 million house. It's not 1%. It's 1,600% increase. So I think that actually matters a lot. Not only for communication and transparency, but also matters a lot because if it were 1%, we really wouldn't, I don't know that this would really be solving any of our budgetary issues. So I wanted to point that out, and just it speaks to the ongoing concerns I'm having about these tax conversations. And I guess I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's a lot of things sort of floating around for me. But I want to make one overarching point that I share my colleagues' just a real sense of seriousness about what we're doing today and concern. And I heard that from everyone who spoke, so I wanted to join with my colleagues in that. I also share in their deep commitment to funding affordable housing. But I have some real concerns about saying simultaneous with this action, we're going to put a line item in the budget, or we're going to be very clear that we're always going to fund affordable housing, when the data shows that a dedicated tax for affordable housing can't be justified because we can't pass it on a 2/3 vote. So the voters are saying they won't support it. And we can't then simultaneously say, well, we're going to go around that by passing this general tax and throwing in a permanent line item. Like, that doesn't, I'm really struggling with that, actually. Not because I don't want to see a permanent line item for housing. I couldn't support that more strongly. But I'm really conflicted about having that conversation at all in the context of a general tax decision. And it's not, it just, part of why I bring this up, and then I'll turn to you, is because as you all remember, or the 7 of us and our staff remember, I was not supportive of the sales tax measure that went to the ballot last year. One of the main reasons why I was not supportive was because it is a general tax that we could not explicitly and specifically direct. And I was very concerned about what would happen once that tax money started coming in and we were not able to spend it in ways that we had hoped or maybe talked about before we started seeing that revenue. And I don't think we've done the hard work of, we being the 7 of us, and I take my 1/7 responsibility, of which I have said this before and I'll say it again, I am responsible. I don't think we've done the hard work that we need to do to put ourselves in a position such that even when this revenue starts coming in, we're not going to be back having this same conversation in 2 years. And I'm really, really struggling putting yet another obligation onto our residents when the path is not clear to me that this is going to solve our problem. It just isn't, because I don't see, and I've made this commitment to our staff and to my colleagues, and I make it here that I will make as many hard decisions as I can in this next budget cycle, but I'm really struggling with passing my failure onto our community in this way, especially after just doing it last year. That said, I see where the winds are blowing here, and I think we continue the conversation. I think we are in such a difficult position, frankly. We've put ourselves in such a difficult position that I don't see an option but to continue the conversation. So I think we should do that. I have some real regret that we haven't had a more fulsome discussion around the TOT, respectfully to our hoteliers. You know how much I appreciate you. It seems that really isn't our priority, and I will go with my colleagues on this, but I do regret that we haven't been able to dig into what that looks like quite as much, and I will be especially concerned if it comes down to it and we have to go that direction because of litigation or because of state law. That'll be hard when that time comes as well. So it's just all bad options, it feels like to me. And I know it's the world we live in, but I'm troubled, and I'm troubled thinking back over how we've gotten here, and the risks that I see ahead to this decision seem pretty similar to the risks that we all saw with the sales tax last year. And I just worry that even with a political promise, to me, that doesn't mean very much nowadays. With that very sunny outlook, I will support moving forward. I am most interested in option 3. I would really like to see, I think we're exploring all options, and I will say on that note, I would ask, please, that we go to our realtor community and not just give them information, but say, where could we put this that would get at that intersection of what is most palatable to you that still works for the city? That's the conversation that I don't think we've had. And if that is option 3 on the $6 million or higher, I think that's where I personally would be leaning, and I would like to really understand where that intersection is. And I do not support the exemption for multifamily or commercial either. And so with all that, I appreciate it, and I'm sorry to have to be voting this way today.
Ms. Santa Maria.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Ms. McAdoo, did you want to respond? I thought you were going to.
No, I appreciate all, and I appreciate that it still feels fuzzy of how all the pieces are coming together, and I think, this is where now the conversation starts with all of our stakeholder groups, and I think I have some ideas, but I wanted to get council direction first before we started having those conversations. So.
Thank you. Okay. A lot has already been said about the bleak outlook of our budget, and looking in from the public's perspective and now walking in a year ago into the ins and outs of this budget has been, just for me personally, very eye-opening. And we are facing incredibly difficult decisions, but I don't want to spend all this time talking about the situation that we're in, because I think we all know what that situation is. And the perspective that I'm bringing into this is my hope is that while we will all have to work together to shoulder this crisis together and resolve it together, it is critical that we do not put this burden on the lowest paid workers, on the people already at the brink of displacement, and not on the shoulders of the people who keep the city and these businesses running. That being said, that is the reason why I would support a real property transfer tax over a TOT. It feels painful to even consider a TOT increase at this time, knowing that we have seen a decrease in visitors internationally. We're also seeing the downward trend of our local economy for our local businesses. We're hearing local restaurants seeing less and less people coming in, and that's not just because of the impacts of the federal government and how that's impacting tourism, but it's also about what we're doing here domestically. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how much the presence of ICE has driven people to go back into their homes and refuse to go and visit the businesses that they used to go to. And so what we do here today, my hope is that we can keep the ripple effect as contained as possible and try not to ripple it out to the lowest paid. And as some of my colleagues mentioned earlier, this is a moment where in a first-class city, as we consider ourselves, in order for us to maintain these services and for us to maintain the allure that attracts all these visitors and attracts investors, we need to be careful about not cutting critical services in these conversations. But at the same time, we are looking very deeply into the budget to make sure that we are cutting expenses where it is not needed. That being said, what I'm hearing from staff is that what we're seeing here, this is one of several options that we are pursuing. None of the things that are being proposed either at Finance Committee or here at City Council are going to be the end-all be-all and the magic thing that's going to help us solve the budget crisis. It's just not. While we also need to look at economic development for local businesses and how we support the tourism industry, and how we keep renters housed and how we build affordable housing, we also need to make sure that we are taking care of our city workers. And I want to make sure that that is something that we keep in mind as we move forward. As far as today's direction, what I'm hearing is the top 11% of property owners would be impacted. The bottom 89% roughly would not be. For a roughly 1% tax for every 1,000. And as was mentioned earlier by some of my colleagues, this is the moment where we have to look at things through the lens of equity. And for the folks that are able to shoulder that cost, it is imperative that we take that on. I am not in favor of excluding commercial properties or multifamily residential units. It seems counterintuitive to me for us to be excluding the properties that are being used as a business. It makes a lot more sense for us to exclude the 3 million and below, those homes that people are buying to live in for a basic need. But once we start getting into the larger properties, the vacation rentals, the commercial properties, multifamily, those are run as a business. And so for me, it is more palatable to keep it to what staff recommended, that top 11% that would be impacted. I will say, though, I would be open to exploring option 3 but it has to be tiered. Because I don't know that we could just do that. And even the $60 per 1,000, it sounds like a scary number. And so I think I'm not saying that we have to do that per se, but I think it's worth that we take it out into the community and see what a tiered approach would look like. But again, very much not in support of excluding multifamily. We should not be excluding commercial either. Those transactions are quite large and they're going to happen regardless because people they're investing and they're expecting that rate of return. So those properties will continue to move. And yeah, I'll leave it at that and just end by saying that what we are doing today is but a piece of how we are approaching our budget crisis. The budget discussions are very much still ongoing. And I encourage everyone from every sector, talk to us, pitch us your ideas, because for a lot of us, what we are trying to do as we mitigate this crisis is make sure that we are taking your lived experience into consideration. I don't take it lightly that a TOT increase would ripple out into local businesses. That's a very serious thing. And I know that so many of our residents are employed by our wonderful hotels and restaurants and all of that. And we have to remember, as we look to maintain the quality of life that we have learned to love and appreciate, it is time for some sacrifices, and it's not easy to say that at all. But we are looking at cost-saving measures, and we are looking at some revenue-generating measures, and this is one of them. So I am in support of staff recommendation, but also open to exploring options. Even options 2 or 3. I would be open to exploring these options, but again, no exclusions for multifamily and no exclusions for commercial. But I do think it's worth having these discussions. If necessary, and we have to pivot over to TOT, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. My hope is we don't have to pivot. Thank you.
All righty. So a lot of stuff on the table. I think the property transfer tax, I think some of the problems right now have been brought up. What's going to be in debate is going to be what are we going to exempt and what are we going to include. I think we're all confused about that. And I see why, because if you're talking about things that we've already just done between the rent freeze and the upcoming upcoming rent control, the 6% of CPI, whatever we end up with is going to end up being something that devalues properties. Already the rent freeze, I've heard from a lot of realtors and I heard from a lot of property owners. We're not really sure yet. It's still anecdotal, but I can't imagine it helps property values to know that my property, the income property that I had, is going to have this cap on it indefinitely. We're not really sure. So that can help. In terms of home ownership, I think that case was made as well, and also with the TOT. When it comes to looking for other solutions like Measure C, and all these guys are really sick of hearing this, but I was the point man, went out to every public meeting and presented Measure C. I did exactly the same for Measure I. I know precisely what the parameters were. I know what was said about it. I knew how it polled. I've got all that stuff. So we can talk about that next time. But there's no slush fund possibility for Measure C. That's just is not practical. And frankly, we passed Measure C in 2017 and Measure I in 2024. And so between those two, that's $45 million of new revenue that we added to the general fund budget. And they were both general taxes. We did a resolution on how to spend Measure C money soon after we passed it, and that's pretty specific. But they're still general fund money. And now we're back again looking at the voters going, hey, guess what? We're out of money again. We passed Measure I. It was supposed to give us the cushions, to have the extras, to do things we wanted to do. Our jobs up here are to provide those amenities and those services the taxpayers expect and rightfully expect us to do. And if I'm one of the labor groups, I'm a little upset with our council from last year when we ended up giving away some reserve funds to both housing and the undocu fund, whatever the funds that we sent out. Okay, good causes, both very legitimate, but not within our capacity to spend. We went well over budget. That wasn't the entire part of the problem, but it was still part of it. And now we're going to have to work our way back from that as well. Our job is to provide those services. We provide those services by having the people here to provide those services for us. And we do that, and the recruitment and retention is a big part of that, and we'll do it to the limits that we can. But we put ourselves in a big hole right now. And to go back out to the public and say, give me one more time, we did it twice in 7 years, which, pretty darn frequent in my mind. And now we're saying, well, we said that $15 million a year was going to give us the adequate cushion. Well, it didn't. So why would anybody trust us to think that this next $5 million pop, whatever we're going to do here, is going to do the same thing? I wouldn't trust us. I don't trust us. I have no intention of supporting any tax at this time, particularly when our entire downtown central business district is virtually closed down because of equivocation, because of lack of decision making, not just on State Street, but in the entire the cross streets as well. We've been talking about getting to yes with our building department, getting TIs approved and getting people in business for a while. And we are working. It's a work in progress. We're not there yet. That should be our focus. Our focus should be getting the downtown open and busy again. Sales tax revenue comes from businesses. Property tax revenue comes from these property owners. There have been 9 properties on State Street that have been reassessed downwards in the last couple of years. And now we're going to go after and try to ding them again. I can't look anybody in the eye and say that's a good idea. I really can't at this point in time. Do we need it? Yeah. We're going to have to, this is going to be a pretty ugly, contentious budget session. Part of it we walked into ourselves. Part of it just kind of happened. Like a lot of agencies around us, revenue's been down while expenses have been climbing. We're not alone. We're not the only people in town. We're not the only people in the county, especially the county, speaking of which, in the same situation. So we've got to figure out what we're going to do, but I can't just keep going out and with my hand out and saying, let's figure out how to get some out of this little sector. If we start parsing down which buildings which kind of properties we're going to do, then once again, we're doing something like we're talking about with rent control. We're doing something that's pretty discriminatory. It lays out a smaller part of the population to bear the burden for everyone else. I don't think that's particularly fair. You know, if we go forward and say, trust us, we'll get this all fixed with this next assessment, I don't think we have the standing to do it. I don't have the chutzpah to look at somebody and say, yeah, we got you this time. So we said it with Measure I. We owe it to our taxpayers. We owe it to our bargaining units. We owe it to everybody that we represent up here to have a sober adult look at this whole thing. And right now, frankly, going out with our hands out doesn't seem that way to me. It seems somebody is going to end up subsidizing a bunch of other folks. And I don't really know what's fair or what's not fair. I do know we get taxed a lot already. So no matter what we end up doing with this, I'm probably going to be on the short end of the stick. And pretty used to that by now, actually. I'm not going forward personally with another tax assessment at this time on any level. I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. I don't think the public, regardless of what the poll said, and I pointed out a couple of things about that. I would love to see how those questions were posed. I don't think the public really understands or trusts us at this point in time. I sure wouldn't, to come up with stuff. When we got some big issues coming up, like Eric talked about the dredge potential liability. We've got a lot of things going on. Our insurance is going up just like everyone else's. So tough decisions, but I really think working on the generation of taxes is really the positive way to go. And keeping the downtown, the central business district closed off is not the great way to generate taxes. I think we can support small business and move forward with that, and probably surprisingly, I think recover, not in 1 year for sure. But I think that's the direction we need to go in order to keep the trust and the faith of the taxpaying public and the people that come to visit us. We need to have a clean, presentable, welcoming town. And we're not always in that mode. And that's a little bit disturbing to me. So that's what I got. So all that said, does anybody want to craft a motion for staff? Probably won't be me.
I mean, I don't know that, I have heard 4 members of the council support continuing the discussions on real property transfer tax. I mean, you're welcome to make a motion. I don't know that
If it's not necessary, I'm fine
like
going
a
without it.
technical motion is needed at this point, because it's really simply you're giving direction to staff to continue conversations and look, I think I've heard, look at real property transfer tax as the priority, but continue conversations with all the stakeholders and also look at expenditure controls. So if that works for folks, I don't know that
you have a
there's a
comment,
formal
Ms. Emery?
motion.
Quick question.
Okay,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
What direction did you hear from us on excluding or including commercial and multifamily residential? Do you need a motion for that, or do you have?
I have 1, 2, 3.
Your question, Chris?
I saw 3 that said don't exempt anything, and 1 that was, 1 exempt multifamily only, so. So if you would like to do a motion on that particular and have us continue to flesh out options, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Because I heard real property transfer tax, but if we want to do a motion, someone wants to do a motion around that.
Okay, so before we do that, let's go, Ms. Nunn has a question, so I'll let you answer that, and then you guys can, if you'd like, craft a motion, or don't really need one unless you have something specific.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Ross. I just wanted to go back to that 1%, because I just want to make sure that's clear. So I've been kind of doing this calculation over and over here, and I'm talking about, I just want confirmation, it's 1% roughly of the purchase price. I'm not talking about increase or decrease, but just, is it, $9.50 per 1,000 is, if we rounded it up, is, 1% of the final sales price.
Yeah, so that's how, like, the city of LA's tax is structured, like the 4% of the value, so of the 5 million, that's how that's structured.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, since there will be
Yeah.
like public
Right.
discussion about it, that if we're saying roughly 1% of the sales price.
So right now, it's 55 cents per 1,000, so we would need to convert. We would do a conversion to put it all into percent, if that's the direction.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Friedman?
Ms. McAdoo, rather than doing a motion, I don't think I opined either way. So I'll just say, since there's 3 there, here's where everybody wants to go. Just include the don't take out the commercial. And this way we don't have to do a motion. It's easier that way. Because she only had 3, so I'm the 4th. So just, there we go.
To not exempt
Not
commercial and
exempted. Leave it in.
multifamily. Leave it in.
Yeah.
So it'd be easier to come back with some kind of a model.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Leave it in. Yeah, this way we don't have to do a motion.
Does that include, did you include multifamily as well, or just commercial?
Multifamily is considered commercial.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody good? All right, thank you very much. We'll go on to council member committee assignments. We're done with that item. Anybody? Come Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. So I attended the Southern California Edison Government Advisory Panel. That's a statewide panel. Attended the Fire Safe Council meeting. A lot of good discussion, particularly about fire ecology certification, that kind of thing. I participated in the Read to Roosevelt program. Attended the LEAP Awards, and congratulations to those recipients. Many of us attended the Democratic Women of Santa Barbara Social Lab last night. And this morning we had our legislative committee meeting, and we're discussed updates to the sort of format and form of the ledge platform, and that'll be coming to council. And then I wanted to mention that at Historic Landmarks Commission, there was a comment there that I think I'll comment on it here too, that maybe needs pursuing, that there's a request really for the State Street Master Plan to formally go to HLC. So that was one of the items of discussion at that meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
I attended the Central Coast Water Authority monthly meeting. We discussed the issue of subsidence. And then the California League of Cities, Coastal Cities Group monthly call. And then also attended the Beacon Executive Committee met, and then the Dem Women Forum last night, and the Legislative Committee this morning.
All right, very good. Well, I attended the Dem Women last night along with some of my colleagues here, and actually the program was very, very well presented. I ended up getting a little extra input that wasn't a great way to end the night, but that was the way that went. But I also went up to a place called Olive Crest at the top of Camino Cielo, which is a facility that houses and treats girls that have been caught in being trafficked. And incredibly amazing story, incredibly tragic story, and when you get to the numbers of how many girls are being trafficked in terms of the country itself. But the people up there are amazing, and I got to talk to some of the girls and where they were going and where they came from, and the fact that they're getting their GEDs and some are going off to college was pretty heartwarming. But I can't imagine the trauma that you go through as one of those victims, as well as the counselors that work there. Are pretty amazing people, but beautiful spot, and if you ever get the opportunity to go up and visit it, I would take that opportunity. It's great. And with that, we shall adjourn. With you too, Mr. Pearson.